čast što smo se okupili u ovako velikom broju i što imamo goste i govornike iz nekoliko zemalja Evropske unije, a tu su i delegacije između ostalih iz Albanije, Bugarske i Crne Gore, pa pozdravljam ovom prilikom sve njih, odnosno sve vas. Imamo dosta ozbiljan plan pred sobom i danas i sutra, tako da nećemo mnogo vremena oduzimati na početku. Želim samo da vam kažem svima da je organizovan i live stream konferencije. Možete je dakle pratiti na internetu, odnosno javiti svima koji su zainteresovani da mogu da je prate. Takođe i svi vi, a i svi oni koji znate, možete nam slati i tweetove tokom konferencije, vidjet ćete ih ovde na ekranu ispisane, obezbeđen je naravno i simultani prevod tokom konferencije. Konferenciju će otvoriti gospođa Ana Marija Viček ispred Ministarstva za prosvetu, nauku i tehnološki razvoj. Ona se već dugi niz godina bavi raznim temama u okviru obrazovanja, a u ministarstvu je državna sekretarka zadužena za preduniverzitetsko obrazovanje i inkluziju. Gospođo Viček, izvolite da nam se obratite. Hvala.
Poštovane koleginice i kolege, dragi gosti iz inostranstva i dragi domaćini, meni je izuzetno velika čast i veliko zadovoljstvo da u svojstvu državnog sekretara, a u ime gospodina Mladena Šarčevića, ministra prosvete, nauke i tehnološkog razvoja, imam čast da otvorim ovu konferenciju. Ovu konferenciju koja ima za temu jednu izuzetno značajnu stvar, a to je sprečavanje drop-outa, odnosno osipanja. Mislim da ćemo se složiti svi ako kažem da je jedna od strateških ciljeva, jedna od bitnih strateških ciljeva naše države upravo sprečavanje osipanja, a to sadrži i strategija razvoja obrazovanja Republike Srbije do 2020. godine. Strategija razvoja obrazovanja predviđa sprečavanje osipanja učenika iz obrazovnog sistema i to kao jedan od osnovnih ciljeva, a taj glasi razvoj dostupnosti i pravednosti sistema obrazovanja kao i smanjenje osipanja dece iz obrazovnog sistema. U skladu sa strategijom i Zakonom o osnovama sistema obrazovanja i vaspitanja, kao i svim podzakonskim aktima, mogu se definisati glavni principi i alati za dostizanje pravednog obrazovanja, a to su uvođenje i afirmacija obaveznog pripremnog predškolskog programa, inkluzivnog pristupa, jednake mogućnosti za svu decu, antidiskriminacija, desegregacija, tolerancija, najbolji interes deteta, upis svakog deteta, individualni pristup i individualan obrazovni plan, afirmativne mere za upis u srednje škole i visokoškolske ustanove, stipendije, pedagoški asistenti i mnoge druge mere. Ja verujem da većina od ovih zvuči poznato za sve vas. Projekat sprečavanja i osipanja učenika iz obrazovnog sistema Republike Srbije je bio realizovan od strane Centra za obrazovne politike, a u saradnji sa Ministarstvom prosvete, nauke i tehnološkog razvoja i UNICEF-om, a uz finansijsku podršku Švajcarske agencije za razvojnu pomoć, kojima se i ovim putem zahvaljujemo. Rezultati ovog izuzetno značajnog projekta predstavljaće i ubuduće smernice za nove sistematske aktivnosti, bit će sistemski ugrađene u novu zakonsku regulativu kojima ćemo dostići, a možda i prestići strateški cilj, a to je da se svakom detetu obezbedi kvalitetno obrazovanje. Poseban akcenat će se i dalje stavljati na decu koje su u riziku od osipanja. Za njih se mora obezbediti kontinuirana podrška od predškolskog nivoa pa sve do zapošljavanja. Ja vam želim da ova 2 dana na ovoj značajnoj konferenciji provedete u lepom ambijentu, a pored toga da sa konferencije ne samo oni stručnjaci koji su uključeni u projekat, nego i deca koju ovim putem izuzetno srdačno pozdravljam i drago mi je što su uključeni i oni u ovaj značajan projekat i nadam se da ćete nakon ova 2 dana, nakon razmene izuzetno dragocenih iskustva, imati osjećaj da je ova konferencija jedna veoma uspešna i značajna bila. Zahvaljujem se.
Zahvaljujem se gospođi Viček. Ona je pomenula ko su glavni organizatori današnje konferencije i partneri u sprovođenju ovog projekta. Jedna od značajnih organizacija bez koje ovaj projekat ne bi postojao jeste i UNICEF, pa pozivam da nam se u ime UNICEF-a obrati direktor Kancelarije u Srbiji, gospodin Michel Senlo.
Dobro jutro. Bonjour. State Secretary, Mrs. Vichek, I hope the name has not been killed. Mrs. Loibly, ladies and gentlemen, friends of children. It's my pleasure to welcome you, not only to Belgrade, but to the final conference on the project combating early school leaving in Serbia through effective dropout prevention and intervention measures at school level. Completing secondary education or vocational equivalent is a prerequisite for the inclusive and sustainable growth of society and countries. However, there is no easy solution to dropout and early school leaving. In this sense, Serbia is no different. The reason for dropout are various. In one hand, the reason can be personal and family related, economic, or cultural. On the other hand, systemic and school-related factors negatively impact on student participation, educational experience, and learning. This project that we have piloted with the Ministry of Education and the Center for Education Policy has clearly shown that schools can address these adverse factors and thus prevent school dropout. That also highlights the importance and power of genuine school-staff collaboration and building partnership with parents, peers, and external institution network in local communities. School, however, cannot do this alone. They need strong support from the Ministry of Education, first of all, the Ministry of Social Welfare, Veteran and Labor, regional school administration, and inspectors. Moreover, school dropout prevention needs to be complemented by sound education, health, and social and youth policy at national and local level. But this also calls for the support of the Ministry of Youth and Sports. This conference could not have come to a better time, as the European Union and accession countries are considering the best measures that need to be taken to prevent early school leaving. The focus is on identification, prevention, intervention, and compensation measures. This conference is an opportunity to celebrate the achievement made so far, and also about the challenges that we met in the pilot project that was implemented here in Serbia. Experience from other countries in tackling school dropout will also be beneficial to us all. It is up to us to act now, so that school can be truly inclusive and equipped to respond to the diverse needs of students. It is up to us to act now for children at risk to receive adequate support from a range of professionals in and beyond the sector of education. It is up to us to reflect on and invest in the lesson learned from this pilot so that the education system in Serbia can rise to the challenge of leaving no child and young person behind. I would like to take this opportunity to present our heartfelt appreciation as UNICEF and gratitude to both the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation and UNICLO, who have provided the funding necessary for us to get that far. But more importantly also, thanks again the Center for Education Policy, or municipalities that have been part of that program, students, teachers, parents, that make it a reality. Thank you. Voilà.
Hvala gospodine Senlo. Gospođa Viček je u svom uvodnom obraćanju pomenula i važnu ulogu švajcarske kancelarije za saradnju u Srbiji, koja je podržala ovaj projekat, pa zbog toga pozivam gospođu Ursulu Leubli, direktorku švajcarske kancelarije za saradnju u Srbiji, da nam se obrati. Izvolite.
Estimated Ms. Vicek, dear Michel, ladies and gentlemen, very good morning. It's a pleasure for me to attend the opening of this conference organized by our partners who are all present here. I recently had the opportunity to exchange with a group of teachers of pilot schools in Kragujevac, and I was very impressed the way how they spoke about their experiences they made with this pilot project. Their UNICEF has been developing this innovative model within the joint program for the inclusion of Roma and vulnerable groups, which is supported by Switzerland. And in the conference, you will hear of these good practices, which could be tested and analyzed thanks to the Swiss support. I am not an education specialist. However, while listening to this group of teachers, it became very quickly clear to me why this pilot is so successful in dropout prevention. It is because teachers changed their behavior. They now care about their pupils and know, most importantly, they know how to handle difficult situations successfully because they learned to do it. And they have the instruments in their hand. So both the teachers and pupils are very committed and motivated and see the benefits of dropout prevention. The good results of these projects are illustrating these efforts. The dropout rate decreased for more than half in the pilot schools. There is a good contribution and collaboration between all involved stakeholders. And most important, and what really makes us very happy as donor, there is an increased quality of teaching in these model schools. Therefore, I am persuaded that this innovative model for effectively combating dropout prevention can be effectively scaled up in the whole Serbia. What we have seen in the project is that these practices are affordable and efficient. It does not cost much. Because teachers train other teachers, it is highly welcomed by local authorities, and it builds trust of parents and students, and they better understand the need for a good and continued education. The exchange of experiences in this conference shall give inspiration on how to improve it further for a successful replication and successful anchoring in the national institutions and the Ministry of Education. What is required for that is the necessary commitment of key actors. A better multi-stakeholder cooperation is needed at national and local level to make use of the existing knowledge and resources for sustainable and cost-effective solutions. But there also needs to be a debate with a vision for good inclusive schools. What are the skills and competencies for such an inclusive education? Only good quality and inclusive schools will motivate children to stay in schools, increase their skills, and enable them a better future. This will then also foster commitment in the society, a society that cares about integrating all its members, and as such can have an inclusive growth, leaving no one behind. I would like to thank UNICEF Belgrade team for their dedicated and excellent cooperation. I wish you a very successful conference, a lot of inspiration to take home, and thank you very much.
Još jednom hvala svim našim uvodničarima. Sada je trenutak da se daju izjave za medije, ukoliko ima zainteresovanih. Ispred sale je Medija Kutak, pa pozivam sve uvodničare da izađu i daju izjave, a mi ćemo odmah naravno nastaviti sa radom, s obzirom da, kao što znate, imamo dosta ozbiljan plan i program. Ukratko ćemo proći kroz program ovog prvog dana. Uskoro će nam se obratiti gospodin Paul Downs i gospodin Boris Jokić. Oni će govoriti o ranom napuštanju školovanja i osipanju učenika iz obrazovnog sistema, i to o glavnim pojmovima, faktorima i uopšte o tome kakva je situacija u zemljama Evropske unije. Potom sledi jedna kratka kafe pauza, a zatim govorimo o pristupima sprečavanju ranog napuštanja školovanja i osipanja učenika iz obrazovnog sistema. Čućemo opet međunarodne govornike, gospođu Marijan Hini i gospođu Leticiju Antonovic. Tada ćemo već doći i do pauze za ručak od 13 do 14 sati, a potom ćemo u popodnevnoj sesiji govoriti o zakonskom i strateškom okviru i inovativnim pristupima sprečavanju osipanja učenika iz obrazovnog sistema iz ugla Srbije. Čućemo 3 predstavnice, Gordanu Cvetković iz Ministarstva prosvete, Tanju Uranković iz UNICEF-a i Jasminu Čekić-Marković iz Centra za obrazovne politike, dakle, moglo bi se reći, glavne krivce za veliki uspeh ovog projekta, a potom ćemo govoriti o ulozima različitih sektora u sprečavanju ranog napuštanja školovanja i osipanja učenika iz obrazovnog sistema. Na kraju dana je predviđena i panel diskusija. Ali da ne bismo mnogo dužili, pozivam našeg prvog govornika da nam se ovde pridruži. To je gospodin Paul Downs, on je direktor Centra za obrazovnu nejednakost. Viši je predavač na katedri za obrazovanje na Gradskom univerzitetu u Dublinu u Irskoj. Učestvovao je u raznim stručnim savjetodavnim ulogama za Evropsku komisiju na temu socijalne nejednakosti, doživotnog učenja, druge šanse u obrazovanju i osipanja učenika. On je član mreže stručnjaka Evropske komisije za socijalne aspekte obrazovanja i obuke. Objavljivao je radove na temu dostupnosti obrazovanja u Evropi, emotivne podrške za prevenciju ranog napuštanja školovanja, uključivanja roditelja i sprečavanja osipanja učenika kroz obrazovanje nastavnika, zatim siromaštva i socijalne uključenosti u osnovnim školama i tako dalje. Od 2001. godine predavač je u predmetu obrazovanje i ljudski razvoj na Fakultetu Svetog Patrika, pomenutog Gradskog univerziteta u Dublinu. Danas će govoriti o fenomenima osipanja učenika i ranog napuštanja školovanja, kao i o najvažnijim faktorima vezanim za te fenomene. Dakle, bez mnogo daljeg uvoda, mislim da ovo sasvim dovoljno govori o tome ko je naš govornik. Pozivam Paula Downsa da nam se pridruži. The floor is yours, Mr. Downs.
Pointer works. Yes, cheers, perfect. Thank you. The novelist Graham Greene, in one of his books, The Power and the Glory, offered the following words. He said, "Hope is an instinct that only the reasoning human mind can kill. Animals never know despair." And hope is really at the foundation of inclusive systems for early school leaving prevention. that we can prevent cultures and communication systems of despair, that we will offer a vision for change for early school leaving prevention. And today in my presentation I'm going to emphasize in particular issues of emotions and relationships to keep youngsters who are on the edge, to keep them in the school system. What I'd emphasize at the start also is that there is not just one early school leaving problem. There are many early school leaving problems. Early school leaving is a behaviour with many, many motivations underlying it. So we need in our strategies to have complex strategies that address the very many different motivations underlying a common behaviour. So I'm going to look at issues around system blockages in communication at a system level. So I'm going to emphasize students' voices, teachers ruling by fear or discriminatory bullying, emotional supports, bullying more generally, social and emotional education, sleep issues that won't hopefully put you to sleep, and overcoming system blockage issues of fragmentation and resistance and exclusion by looking at multidisciplinary teams, family support services, as well as lifelong learning issues and challenges to expulsion. And you want me to slow down? Okay. All right. I also want to give you a quote here from Novak Djokovic, those who I think you know, who said, those born into poverty or on the margins of society require our extra support to realize their dreams. What I would say as well as that, we all agree with that, is that we also need system reform, that systems need to change. Also regarding strategy, I would urge you to, at a strategy level, see which level of need you are trying to change or address with students. Are you looking at the universal level of all students in a school, trying to promote their strengths, for example, through the arts? Are you looking at selected prevention, which are groups of moderate risk, where are not high risk, but moderate risk of early school leaving? That group needs group interventions, peer supports, but not necessarily individual intensive interventions. The indicator prevention level is then often missed. That is the level of highest need, chronic need, complex interconnected needs of children. And that group need a different strategic intervention for early school leaving. Much more individual and much more intensive. In Iceland, I remember being at a conference where Brigisdóttir emphasized that with early school leavers in Iceland, they interview them as they're leaving school. But of course, this is much too late in the process. We need to be listening to children from the start. We need to build in responsive systems and listening processes, not only for the children who are the top children in the class, but we need to hear the children whose marginalized voices need to be heard also. So what I would argue is that, from my own work, is that we need to look at the blockages in system. Where are the systems failing children, and how can we address these system blockages? So the early school leaving issue at EU level, in the beginning with some of these documents in 2011, they neglected students' voices. But in more recent work at EU Commission level, this group, the Thematic Working Group, emphasised that ensure children and young people are at the centre of all policies aimed at reducing early school leaving, that their voices are taken into account. So we need to place children to guide their vision of school needs to be central to reform processes. Obviously, Article 12.1 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child talks about the weight and voice of the child in proportion to their age and maturity. Much research from the US, from America, on early school leaving neglects the voice of the child because in the US they have not ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Regarding the area of authoritarian teaching where there's a culture and climate of fear and anger, We have a lot of evidence at a European level across many countries that this is a system problem affecting children's motivation to stay on at school. So, for example, in this Polish study, there was talk even of experience of school violence from teachers towards students, being directly hit or knocked at by 6% of students. And 13% of Polish students observed this occurring for others in the school. Teachers using offensive language to embarrass children was also reported here by 16% directly and 28% more widely. In Finland, Pihalto, I don't know if I have that pronunciation correct, Pihalto in Finland, their research referred to unjustified and authoritarian behaviour by teachers that undermined pupils' agency or voice and was a source of burden, anxiety and anger. If we look at PISA, PISA we always think about is just for literacy and maths, but it is not. There is a big section on school climate, on issues of belonging in school and feeling like you are in the school. What we see here is that France is particularly low in sense of school belonging. Only 38% of socioeconomically disadvantaged students said they felt they belong in school in France. Serbia is doing quite well on this figure for school climate, up at around 86%, which is above the OECD average. But it is still a system issue to make sure that the other 14% or 17% in your system who say they feel like they are an outsider, that this group are systematically and systemically addressed. Other work by Chafai and Cooper in Malta again referred to a blaming and punitive approach by many teachers that was seen as to make the problem worse, and that a perceived victimization by teachers occurred much more and had more impact even than bullying by peer groups in the Maltese research. Now, of course, the corollary of that is also the case that really warm, caring, supportive teachers have a massive influence. They keep children in the system in many ways. So there is a wide range of research saying that this is what we need, a caring climate in the school system. In my own work in Ireland, we noticed a big difference between primary and post-primary schools. At the end of primary schools, we had about 74% of students saying they were treated fairly by their teacher in school. But after one term in secondary school, this had dropped to 55%. Only just above half perceived they were being treated fairly by teachers in the school system. So what we see here, so these figures were statistically significant, but you see here at second level we had a quarter of students saying that they are not treated fairly by teachers in school. Now it may be said that these are only perceptions, but perceptions matter. Perceptions affect motivation and behaviour. The World Health Organization emphasised not only the need to have a caring atmosphere, but in their survey of children's well-being across Europe, they emphasised the concern with teachers publicly humiliating students who perform poorly. So this is a European-wide problem, a worldwide issue that needs firm addressing in an early school leaving strategy. The EU Commission consultation emphasised classroom management strategies for teachers. How we work to address that complexity needs to be strongly addressed for early school leaving. In an Estonian context, in one research I did at the European level, one school principal said, schools can create circumstances where unwanted students feel they have to leave, and they do. They walk. Similarly, in Lithuania, another school management representative said, the attitudes towards students have to change and then they will feel better at school. And to go away from this label of the good student and the bad student. We have to stop these negative labels that tell more about the teachers than about the child. In one of my own schools in Ireland, I remember going in and a group of students said to me, there is no sunlight in this school. And we don't have much sun in Ireland, I know that. But they were also referring about psychological sunlight, emotional sunlight. And I remember the school principal, who was very strict at the time. I was trying to have a nice conversation with him after hearing the pain of the students in the school. And I said to him, I see in the room, when you come into the school, there's a big open space. And he said, yes, we're trying to get rid of that. Yeah. So there is a sense that, in some schools, if you have a school that is alienating students from the system, the question becomes not why do people leave the school early, but why does somebody go to school in the first place? There's a question as well that I think needs to be raised, which is, one early school leaver said, some teachers think they own the school. So I think there is a question worth asking regarding early school leaving: who does own the school? Is it the teachers? Is it the principal? Is it the children? Is it the parents? Is it the state? Is it everyone? I'm going to move on a little bit from this, but just to emphasize again the issue of anger management and conflict resolution skills for teachers as a strong issue. And the sense also of social hierarchy, that this may be something that teachers need to make sure they're not giving a message of bias on this issue towards certain students and against others. Moving on then to an issue that, in my view, needs a lot of addressing, and that in very recent years there's much powerful evidence to suggest that social and emotional education can have a big impact on early school leaving prevention. So social and emotional impact can improve not only student behaviour and academic performance, but it can address a whole range of issues. So the Durlach et al. Review 2011 of over 200 programmes internationally found benefits around attitudes to school, positive social behaviour, conduct problems, emotional distress, academic performance. A wish list of things we would like to change in the system. Social and emotional education is a key dimension at curricular level for this. Similarly, another study by Sklad et al. Offered similar findings, again a meta-analysis in 2012. So here they looked at the benefits for social and emotional programs on antisocial behaviour, social skills, preventing substance abuse, positive self-image, positive behaviour. And if these are approaches that can be routinely built into the curriculum by normal teachers that don't need outside people to develop these approaches. And of course, social and emotional education or learning is not the same as civic or religious education. So a firmer focus on this, there is powerful evidence of the virtue of social and emotional awareness in the students as well as in the teachers. And of course, this can go across the curriculum for empathy in history, language and emotion in English, conflict and role play in drama, in many, many other subjects. Moving back to the issue of discriminatory bullying. A study by Alame across 10 European countries noted that when the teacher treated children from different ethnic groups the same, there was lower bullying in the classroom. When the teacher, according to the students, favoured some ethnic groups over other ethnic groups, then there was an increase in bullying of those minority ethnic groups. So Alame's study is well worth looking at, and about the role of a ripple effect of how the teacher can create a warm classroom climate to keep a sense of equality in the classroom. Moving on to issues of emotional supports. A range of international research emphasises that poverty impacts on mental health. We're not saying that this causes mental health problems, but it is a risk factor. It's an extra stress in people's lives. Whether it's for eating disorders, behavioural problems, post-traumatic stress disorder, morale more generally, a sense of a loss of hope and depression. There's a wide range of research saying that just the sheer fact of living in poverty is a stress upon people's mental health, requiring emotional supports. Quiroga's research in Montreal of French-speaking adolescents made the point that depression symptoms were strongly linked with early school leaving. There was the sense that people felt that even if they tried, they were not going to succeed. So they stopped trying. So students' negative self-beliefs became a sense of they believed that they were going to do more poorly, even if they were not doing more poorly academically. So Quiroga et al. Conclude that interventions that target student mental health and negative self-perceptions are more likely to improve dropout prevention. So the idea here is also, in much research, of a failure identity. People stop trying in school. They feel they're going to fail, so they stop trying, and we need to break that cycle of despair. So even apart from poverty-related depression, emotional distress contributes directly to early school leaving, based on a range of different studies on emotional distress. So how does the system supports prevent early school leaving through emotional support services? Emotional trauma was a big issue in the Irish Parliament and Senate report. Here we saw issues of rape, bereavement, sexual abuse directly impacting on early school leaving. And it's also recognised in international research that it's the quiet children, the more withdrawn children, that often get missed by teachers. In the classroom, the child who's very aggressive or acting out, it's easy to see the warning signs there. That child is on fire. You can see it in the classroom very visibly, but there are also children with internalizing problems who may not be showing it, who need to also have these supports. And as in one of our own studies in Ireland, one of the students said, "Why do you think some people are dying? Because there is no one to talk to." Or self-harm issues, that a lot of this was also linked with a general loss of hope and fatalism about the future. Sleep, then, is another issue that is very neglected in many European contexts. And that's basically the point that if people are living in unstructured rhythms in their life, they may not have enough sleep going to school. So it's a question worth asking, what time are the children in your school going to sleep at night? And if you are tired, how is it going to affect you? In many, many ways. Your motivation, your concentration. I'm sure if some of you are tired right now, your memory. That there are ways in which sleep can make you also more bad-humoured with your teachers, more bad-humoured with your friends. So it gets you involved in more conflict also. So international research emphasises the need for over 9 hours sleep for primary students, and arguably for secondary school students also. And there's a range of issues here there to show that attention, even intelligence scores, are affected by loss of sleep. So a question we asked in some of our own Irish research was, at what time do you usually go to sleep on a weekday? Now, getting children to change their patterns at weekends is much harder than at a weekday. So even short curricular-based interventions, making parents and children aware that sleep is a health issue, this can make big and quick changes in the child's life. So here we saw, for example, in one primary school, School E, 26% of students were going to sleep after midnight. Now, they may also have had emotional reasons for not sleeping well, if they were stressed, or also if they were hungry, if they were too hungry to sleep. Food and poverty may also be a factor affecting their ability to sleep. Moving also then on to the issue, I've just finished a report for the European Commission on school bullying, and we make the point in that report that bullying and early school leaving are two sides of the same coin. In other words, it may not be the same children who are at risk of early school leaving who are at risk of bullying, though often it can be, but the common system responses for prevention can be the same, for early warning systems, for multidisciplinary teams, for a positive school climate. All of these issues affect early school leaving and also bullying. But a quite interesting finding came out from the Cornell study. This study looked at 276 high schools. And what they observed here was that bullying does not need to be just the particular, you don't have to be the victim of bullying for bullying in your school to heighten early school leaving risk. So in other words, the mere fact that when you're going to school, you could be the victim of bullying The threat of being bullied is there because it is in the atmosphere or the school climate. So what they observed, Cornell et al. In their study, was that poverty and academic capability were at the same level of an issue as bullying in school. The school climate had as big an effect as even poverty-related factors. So the argument here from Cornell et al. Is that early school leaving programs, often focus too narrowly on the individual child. They need to be looking at systems and the wider systems. And I think that's one of the virtues of the project here here today, is that you are looking at the systems to change the systems to address those issues. Moving then into the issue of other forms of system blockage, not just regarding communication, but regarding fragmentation, where the left hand does not know what the right hand is doing. So here we need to move across Europe to multidisciplinary teams in and around schools. Early school leaving is a complex problem needing many different kinds of professionals, whether it's speech and language therapists to look at language issues that may be impacting on the child's aggressive behaviour, or outreach family support workers, which I will come on to in a minute. In Denmark, they have one multidisciplinary team for every school. But even if we got to one multidisciplinary team for every area or cluster of schools, that would be great across Europe. This is one project that was involved in Ireland that is well worth considering, which is a family support outreach visitation to the home. These are for children at very high levels of non-attendance in school. So obviously the first indicator of a risk of early school leaving is that the child is not attending school. So school attendance is the first behavioural indicator of a big risk. So here the childcare workers help the parents, who many of these would have had drug addiction issues, serious mental health issues. These are at the chronic need indicated prevention level. They're enabling them to prepare breakfast, get their school uniform or their school bag ready, to ensure the child gets to school at time. Some very basic tasks that they were trying to help get the parent to get more structured to help the child get to school. We saw huge gains in school attendance from this kind of home outreach approach. So I would very much urge a family outreach approach. So an outreach does not just mean information or leaflets, it means conversation, dialogue, relationship building. Some of the issues regarding territoriality and services needs also to be addressed to address fragmentation at system level. So you may have rivalries across municipalities and schools that may be stopping schools sharing good practice. If your neighbouring school is doing something very well, does that make your school curious about it, or does it make them feel threatened that, oh, the neighbour is doing so well, that does not reflect well on our school? So a culture and a climate of sharing different approaches is very important for cross-school cooperation. And when there's economic recessions, often local rivalries get worse. People go more into their boxes. They don't want to share because they think funds could be taken from their school or service to other services. So what we need also are frameworks for common goals and visions across schools, across areas, but also across professionals. And to see if we are locating community services, that they are in spaces where people feel comfortable going to, that they are not only in welcoming environments, but also in places that are easy to access. People don't have to travel too far to get. So I think also we would argue from a multidisciplinary team reports we've done for the European Commission is that we need to move away from many, many agencies all almost competing with each other to help children, to have less agencies but with more coherence about the goals they're trying to achieve, and more multidisciplinary approaches. What we see here is also the concern with passing on bits of the child and family, where referral processes are so complicated, where there's so many services are reaching a family that the family does not know which service is from which background. So what we need here is to recognize multidisciplinary team-based approaches, and some examples of these could be outreach care workers, therapists, counselors, nurses, speech and language therapists, social workers, occupational therapists for motor skills of children, but this is not just enough to put them all in the same location. There needs to be common frameworks for cooperation and a clear leader to those teams. We also need to move away from committee sitting, where you have many disciplines sitting on committees but not involved in direct delivery. Multidisciplinary teamwork is expensive, so we need to make sure it is being addressed directly with the people who it's trying to reach. Also, this can look at a whole range of issues linked with early school leaving. Non-attendance, trauma, bullying, mental health, language development, parental support, sleep deficits, substance misuse, suspension or expulsion from school, conflict with teachers. So a whole range of these issues can be addressed through multidisciplinary team working. Moving then into the issue of parents' voices in the school system and a democratic culture around this. So another word for inclusive systems is democratic school systems. So a question that's asked in a Swedish context by Buakaz and Persson is, do the teachers distrust parents? That there's a sense that, at least in some European contexts, teachers may treat the parents, particularly parents from marginalised backgrounds, as being a threat rather than an important voice in the school. So there's a kind of unofficial reality as well as the official reality that, oh yes, we want parents to be involved. A point that has been made in a European project I was involved in across 10 European cities was that there may be resistance in many schools across Europe by teachers to engage with parents. It may be seen as peripheral to their main job. So there is an issue about what is in the contracts of teachers and promotional posts for teachers about engaging with parents. What I've also emphasised here for parental involvement is that in a number of European cities, what they often did was hand leaflets to parents who didn't read them, and then they said, oh, the parents are not interested in our children's education. But what we need to look at are what are the kinds of issues that interest parents first, and start from there. And I think one of the first things that parents are interested in, and I speak as a parent myself, is that their child is safe and happy in school. So what are our processes for communicating with parents if they do not feel safe and happy in school? So that they're leaving school because they don't feel in a safe environment. So there may be other issues in which there needs to be to improve communication between parents and students. Maybe we need key role workers for engaging with parents that happen in some countries. But I think there is an issue of saying, well, what are the problems the parent sees in the school, and how can those parents be empowered to articulate those problems in the school? So communication processes are not only about the lovely things, the nice warm events that may happen in a school, but also about the system blockages and barriers that may take place. System problems, school policy issues, so parents need a voice and a role in school policy, but also marginalised parents need to have that as well. Another dimension here to parental involvement we asked in this European project was, how many of your schools are open after school hours for lifelong learning classes, for local parents or local community? So we looked here across a number of different European cities, and 3 means that this happens in 80% of schools. So in The Hague and in Gijón in Spain, most of the schools there open up after school hours for lifelong learning classes. So the school is seen as the centre of a community education approach. The school is not only for primary or secondary students, it's a lifelong learning, community lifelong learning centre. We see then in Sofia and Nantes and Munich and Usti and Antwerp that this was happening in less than 30% of their schools. A point then that I'd also would like to emphasise is the issue of alternatives to expelling children from the school system. From sending children to another school because they do not fit in with a particular school's approach. From an early school leaving perspective, it is a kind of system absurdity to have many people on one side trying to keep people in the school system, and then others having processes that kick children out of school. So this is where the multidisciplinary teams, the emotional support services can come into play to address the needs of those children who may be at a high level of risk, who need to have more complex services in place. We see in an Irish context, over 5% of the population are temporarily removed from school, which is over 16,000 students. In UK, in Britain, we see that those who are excluded from school are 3 times more likely to be early school leavers. So that issue of alternative supports for expulsion from school needs to be firmly addressed. So I've set out, and I won't go through all these now, but a set of just questions at a system level to be addressed. But I'm going to finish with a quote from the philosopher Sartre. Sartre said that bad faith is to pretend something is necessary, which is in fact voluntary. Early school leaving is not necessary, it is voluntary, it is a system-level decision through system-level blockages and exclusions and gaps in communication processes. So we need to have system reform across Europe to address these issues fundamentally. Thank you.
Please remain, gospodin Downs će ostati ovde za govornicom. You can remain seated and maybe we'll have some questions for you. Ukoliko imate neka pitanja, sada je dobar trenutak da postavite pitanje gospodinu Downsu ili neki komentar na ovo što ste čuli. Tako da imamo par minuta vremena za pitanja odmah sada. Ja bih imao jedno pitanje, ako me gospodin Downs čuje. Do you hear the translation or? Not yet, okay, because I can do it in English, but then the Serbian listeners will need the translation. Yeah, okay. Dakle, moje pitanje je vezano za, pominjali ste veliki uticaj spavanja, odnosno količine sna na uspeh u školi. Da li možete malo više da nam kažete o tome i da li postoji bilo kakva šansa, vidimo da je to problem ne samo ovde u Srbiji nego širom Evrope, da se možda malo razmisli o drugačijem rasporedu časova, pogotovo o domaćim zadacima. Ovde u Srbiji, ne znam kakva je situacija u Irskoj, ovde u Srbiji su deca preopterećena domaćim zadacima, pa moraju mnogo da rade i kod kuće posle škole i onda automatski nemaju dovoljno vremena za spavanje. Možda ja grešim. Ali imam i ja neku decu u školi i neki moji prijatelji, pa znam kakva je situacija. Da. Yeah, you can.
Okay, what I would say about this issue is that this issue is, there's a growing amount of research, but it's very recent research, across internationally. It's a very neglected problem at policy level. The European Commission have referred to it at times in some of their documents, but it is, in my view, it is an issue that can be addressed quite quickly. I'm basing this just on some initial emerging Irish research that some of my master's and postdoctoral students have engaged in. And what they did was a 6-week curricular program. In 6 weeks, focusing on children having a diary with to reflect on what time they go to sleep, how many hours sleep are they getting. So the children monitor, first of all, in a diary, what sleep levels they currently have. They then have a dialogue with the teacher and with their parents about, well, what are the desired levels of sleep? How can we change this? So the children are part of the ownership of the change. And what we found is, even in a 6-week intervention, reasonably intensive, but not that intensive, in 6 weeks, they got big changes to primary school children's sleep behaviors during a weekday, so that they were going to sleep much earlier, and no one in the class, in one particular group, was going to sleep after midnight anymore. So they'd managed to change sleep patterns with a very quick not expensive intervention by the classroom teacher in 6 weeks. Now, the children were resisting the going to sleep early at weekends. So the 6-week program did not change their social life at weekends, but it did during the weekday.
Hvala. Ima li još neko pitanje za gospodina Downsa? On će svakako ostati tu, pa možete da ga pitate nešto i... Aha, ima jedno pitanje, izvinjavam se. A ne, nema. Ipak nema pitanja, dobro. Vreme je onda da čujemo gospodina Borisa Jokića, naučnog saradnika u Centru za istraživanje, razvoj i obrazovanja na Institutu za društvena istraživanja u Zagrebu. Kao predstavnik nevladinog sektora od 2011. godine, on je član tematske grupe Evropske unije o osipanju učenika u okviru strategije 2020, koja se bavi izazovima vezanim za razvoj i sprovođenje sveobuhvatnih politika za smanjenje osipanja učenika u zemljama članicama. Bavio se i uslovima za uspešne politike, fokusirajući se na prikupljanje podataka i praćenje, pitanja upravljanja, međusektorsku saradnju i tako dalje. Učestvovao je u pripremanju izveštaja Evropske komisije koji se odnosi na sveobuhvatni pristup škola u sprečavanju osipanja, a danas će nam govoriti o postojećim politikama koje su najzastupljenije u okviru Evropske unije, a koje su vezane za temu sprečavanja osipanja učenika i ranog napuštanja školovanja. Izvolite, gospodine Jokić.
Ovako, dobar dan svima. Ja sam Boris Jokić. Pomalo je schizofrena situacija kada dolazite 400 km odavdje. Govorimo zapravo istim jezikom, a sada bih trebao govoriti na engleskom. U toj schizofrenoj situaciji ja ću zapravo napraviti i vas pomalo schizofrenima, pa ću pola prezentacije održati na engleskom jeziku, a onda ću pola održati na hrvatskom ili srpskom ili kako god hoćete ga zvati. Prije svega htio bih čestitati i to sljedećim institucijama, odnosno ustanovama, to je prije svega UNICEF, pa onda Centar za obrazovne politike, pa onda ministarstvo i to prethodna administracija, pa čestitati ministarstvu, novoj administraciji, ali prije svega školama, nastavnicima i učenicima na sudjelovanju u projektu koji je zapravo primjeran i egzemplaran ne samo za ovu regiju, ne samo za Srbiju, nego za cijelu Evropsku uniju. U tom svom izlaganju ja ću krenuti dakle sa engleskim jezikom. Pa svi vi zapravo koji trebate sada prijevod, stavite slušalice za engleski jezik. I'll switch now to English, so you can switch your headphones and listen to me in English. Okay. Reducing average EU rate of early school leaving to less than 10% by 2020 is, as you know, one of the main targets of Europe 2020 strategy. There are several issues with that. There is the issue of definition, and both definition and measurement. Is it at all clear what we speak about when we speak about early school leaving or school dropout? Then I'll speak a little bit about the state of early school leaving in the European Union and target of below 10% as both ambitious and reachable political goal. Then I'll speak about conditions for successful policies against early school leaving in terms of what can we do in governance and cooperation, in data collection and monitoring, in prevention, intervention, and then compensation. Finally, I'll change language. I'll change language in both bureaucratic manner and language as such. But let's start with the issue of definition and measurement. Early school leaving, as you know probably, but for those of you that don't know, is defined as following. These are young people who leave education and training with only lower secondary education or less, and who are no longer in education or training. They are measured as persons aged 18 to 24, fulfilling the following two conditions. The highest level of education or training attained is, as I said, below 3 level. There is no education or training has been received in the 4 weeks preceding the survey. Early school leaving is being measured by the labor force survey at the European level. It's measuring people who have left school a long time ago. Some of them have left school 6, 7, or 8 years ago. Term early school leaving is very different than school dropout, which often refers to discontinuing an ongoing course of education, dropping out in the middle of the education. This dropout of education can occur at any time of education and for various reasons, not only for disengagement of those who are studying, but for various personal, familial, and societal reasons. The way that you define what you measure has serious implications on what you can do and where you place your focus. If your focus is on ESL, then you are focusing on re-engagement. You have people who are 18 to 24, they've left school, and you want to re-engage them in the school. But if you are focusing on a school dropout, you're basically focusing on intervention. There is still a big debate in academic terms and in the academic world. Why has EU at all focused on early school leaving? There is no clear answer to that. What implications could it have, as you will see through the data, on common EU policies on this issue? What implications can this have on regional policies, on national policies, on regional policies within the national policies? Although measurable, question remains is if this indicator is at all valid. And question is even bigger. What if you are stuck with a poor indicator? What happens if you have spent billions of euros, billions and billions of euros, on an indicator that is poor? The state of early school leaving in Europe is as following. Target is less than 10%. Currently, European Union is at 11.1%. European Union will most definitely reach this goal. This goal, as it seems now in 2016, was maybe not ambitious enough. It was reachable as such. There is, among those who leave school early, there are more men than women. There is 12.7% of men and 9.5% of men. There is 20.1% of those who are foreign-born who leave school early. There is 10.3% of those who are native-born in each country who leave school early. The best country in Europe and the world, considering this indicator, is surprisingly Croatia. One of the worst countries, or the worst country, or the country with the highest level of EU countries, is Spain at the moment. In Spain, there is 21.9% of those who leave school without gaining those qualifications that I described earlier. If you look at the data a little bit closer, and you can see it here, you can see there has been improvement in almost all countries in early school leaving rate, reducing early school leaving rate between 2010 and 2015. Here, you will see EU 28. You will see that EU 28 is reaching this goal almost rapidly. You will see also that at the end of these countries, there are countries which are very close to Serbia, Croatia and Slovenia, as I said, with the countries with the lowest rate of early school leaving. We will also see that some countries have gained an increase in tremendous improvement. For example, Portugal, who has in 2010 had almost 30% of those who has left school. In 2015, this is now less, or something around 13.5%. You will see also countries which have not succeeded in lowering their early school leaving rate. For example, Estonia, or for example, Hungary, in which the early ESL rate has increased. You will also see some other countries close to us which are not members of EU, for example, such as Turkey, with high levels of early school leaving. Some countries that you would maybe not expect that have a high level of ESL, such as Iceland or Norway, having much higher ESL rate than the countries in your neighborhood, the countries such as mine. If you look at it more closely, you will see that boys, as a group, particularly have been successful, the countries have been successful in lowering the rate of ESL for boys. You'll see that Spain has made a tremendous improvement in doing that. But these countries are also in a way of still doing it. If you look at the data even more closely and look at the structure of those who are leaving school and what is their work-related status with regards to ESL, you will see some interesting remarks. For example, in countries which are prosperous, such as Iceland or Norway, majority of those who have left schools are employed. They're in work. It's going to be a big problem for these countries if you are a young person and you have a job and you have decent earnings to go back into the school and gain a qualification. In some countries, such as Italy, for example, majority of those who have left schools would like to work but do not have a job. They're not employed. If you look even further into the diagnosis of the situation, what actually early school leaving is, and you look at the differences within the countries, between the rural areas, between the towns and suburbs and the cities, you will see that the map of ESL in Europe is as heterogeneous as possible, both between the countries, but also within the country. You will see the countries, for example, such as United Kingdom, where you will have no difference in ESL if it's rural area, if it's a city, or if it's a metropolitan area. You will then see some countries, for example, such as Portugal, or such as Bulgaria, which is also your bordering country, where the majority of ESL is situated in rural areas, is basically founded by poverty, by other social issues. And then in the big cities, in the cities like Sofia, you will have a much lower or lower than European levels rate of ESL. If you look even further, you will see that in some countries, for example, such as Croatia, there is almost no early school leaving. But I'll come to that when I start speaking in Croatian. Okay. The consequences of this situation are dire. Unemployment, social inclusion, poverty, both for an individual and for a society. There are groups of people who are more likely to leave school. There are boys, young people from a migrant background, disadvantaged minorities, including Roma. ESL is higher in vocational education, and often this part of education is stigmatized for having those children. However, it could be used in combating early school leaving. It's a very complex phenomenon, as Paul has said. It is utmost personal issue. It's not a political issue. It's not a social issue. It's a personal issue. It goes into the deep anxiety and deep psyche of the family, of the young person. School and education can play different roles with decision to leave school. However, they cannot and should not act alone. If you are left for yourself, you teachers here and kids, to combat this, you will never succeed. The countries which leave it just to the education will never succeed. So what can we do? There is quite clear map in Europe what can be done about that. And there is quite a lot of success about what can be done, could be done about it. When we worked in a thematic working group, and you will see some other speakers during these 2 days who also participated in that group, we set out to do it to map it in 5 different elements. First is governance and cooperation, then data collection and monitoring, then prevention, intervention, and compensation. And I will just quickly go through some elements of it. Considering governance and cooperation, it's quite clear, and already it has been spoken here in the opening speeches, that there should be a clear coordinating body. There should be someone who makes decisions. There should be someone who is functional in coordinating all of these actions. There should be a progressive approach. So once you set it out in 2013, Serbia is going to do this and this by 2020, or Europe is going to do this and this by 2020. If you are not flexible in your approach, you're going to fail also. So approach should be flexible. It should allow both local and regional adaptation. It goes for the multinational entities, such as European Union, but it also goes to the nations, such as Serbia or Croatia. The approach should be such that the regions and localities can adapt the elements of policy that you have developed. Schools and local stakeholders need autonomy to identify and develop solutions which fit local context and which fit local actors. If you go from Belgrade and impose something, and I'm sorry that I'm taking this freedom to speak like that. If you go from Belgrade and impose something for the south of Serbia or for part of Vojvodina, or if you, from Zagreb, you say in Istria or Slavonia or Osijek or Dubrovnik, it should be done at this and like this and this and this and this, you're also going to fail. If you don't address what's going on in the local context, there is no chance for success. There should be awareness raising and training for all involved in governance and cooperation. There should be sustainable funding. What's interesting, funding can be used to combat ESL. Countries as Netherlands, as Holland, are paying schools for every child that stays in the school. It's a very controversial issue. So for example, for every child that you keep in the school and the teachers get money, get funding. There should be close monitoring and evaluation. There should be, which is always a holy grail, there should be interagency and interinstitutional arrangements. Schools should have a central role. As Paul has said, in the future, there will be no effective policy which does not address student voice, in which pupils are not heard, in which pupils are not also suggesting policy elements. And there should be learning cooperation. Concerning data collection and monitoring, as a scientist, as an academic, there should be both large-scale empirical studies on early school leaving, while also, as Paul has said, small-scale qualitative studies on exploring the voice of those who are involved in early school leaving. There should be data collection systems on national and regional level. Data should be provided timely. There should be concern about the security of data, about the transparency of data. The data should be reported regularly so the public and the teachers and the communities know about the early school leaving. And there should be a follow-up of data. In terms of prevention, the successful countries, the successful systems, the successful regions have done following. There should be access to good quality early childhood and care. If you don't start early working with kids and families, you're also bound to fail. There should be a relevant and engaging curriculum. If the curriculum, as is often here, is based upon premises 50 years ago and based on the all-time idea of academia, you're also bound to fail. There should be flexible educational pathways, better integration of migrants, smooth transition between the levels of education, high quality and attractive and engaging vocational education, and involvement of pupils and parents. There should be, like in Ireland, and there's going to be a speech about it later, there should be a whole school approach, strong and well-developed guidance system, as well as cooperation with the world of work. In terms of intervention, what we can do is following. We should develop and have intact early warning systems, systematic support framework within schools, focus on the needs of individual pupils, extracurricular, as Paul has also said, open the school to the community, open it for something else than just school. There should be support to teachers and empowerment of families and those who are involved in the education of the child. And there should be a raising of the parental awareness of ESL. Finally, in the compensation, there should be accessible and relevant second chance schemes in which Serbia has excelled. Serbia has that developed much better than Croatia has. There should be recognition of prior learning. There should be personalized and holistic approach to second chance education. As I said, flexibility in the curricula and teacher involvement and support. So what is that system that works? Which system works? And there's just one answer. Sad vas molim da skinete ove slušalice. And please. Sustav koji funkcionira je Hrvatska. Dobar dan svima još jednom. Ups. U Hrvatskoj je stopa napuštanja školovanja 2,7%. Ove zemlje su takve da se u njima pazi na svaki kamen. To su zemlje koje imaju nevjerojatna arhitektonska povijesnu baštinu. U njoj, bila to Hrvatska, a možemo govoriti i o Srbiji, se pazi tradicijski na sve što smo nekada izgradili. To su ujedno i zemlje koje imaju nevjerojatna prirodna bogatstva. U tim prirodnim bogatstvima dolaze ljudi 1000 kilometara daleko da bi se divili sustavima jezera, da bi se divili fjordovima koji nisu u Norveškoj nego u Srbiji, da bi se divili ravnicama koje su i u Hrvatskoj i u Srbiji i u brojnim drugim zemljama. Međutim, to su zemlje u koje, a ja ću govoriti za Hrvatsku, a evo vi sad govorite za sebe ako hoćete, ali ja ću govoriti i za vas u nekom trenutku, to su zemlje koje 26 godina zanemaruju svoj ključni potencijal i jedini potencijal koji zapravo imaju. To su zemlje koje zanemaruju ljudski potencijal. 26 godina, mogu govoriti za svoju zemlju, a opet kažem mogu i za sve, 26 godina ovdje obsesivno pazimo kamen, obsesivno pazimo vodu, međutim o ljudima se ne brinemo. A situacija 2016. godine u Hrvatskoj nije baš ne znam kakva. Hrvatska je škola takva da potiče učenje na pamet. Ona vam je idealna za biflante. Znate šta su biflanti? To su ovi štreberi. A sve potiče da se pokoravaju autoritetima. Hrvatski su školski programi krivi što se mladi ne mogu zaposliti. Jedini problem sa ovim izjavama je da su one iz 1905. godine. Izrekao ih je Stjepan Radić. 1905. godine. Hrvatska 2016. godine na međunarodnim ispitivanjima ima nejednoznačne rezultate. Bolja je od Srbije i to određenim skupinama je nekakva gratifikacija. Međutim, ti rezultati su zapravo katastrofalni. 2012. godine na PISA ispitivanju 29,9% hrvatskih 15-godišnjaka je matematički funkcionalno nepismeno. Oni znaju zbrajati, oduzimati, množiti i dijeliti. Međutim, ono što su naučili u školi ne znaju primijeniti u životnoj situaciji. Onih najnaprednijih kojima se ovi prostori jako ponose. Na kraju krajeva neki će reći, vidim tu i neke koje osobno znam, a neki će reći, pa kako, recimo, ti si iz tog istog sustava, pa šta zapravo govoriš o tom sustavu, nešto što možda i nije tako. Međutim, na najnaprednijim razinama matematičke pismenosti, to su 5. i 6. razina matematičke pismenosti prema PISA ispitivanju, njih je bilo u Hrvatskoj 7,0%, u Srbiji ih je bilo još manje, u Makedoniji ih je bilo također još manje, u Sloveniji ih je bilo 13,7%, u Poljskoj, kojim smo se mnogi smijali prije, ne znam da li kod vas, ali prije jesmo, za koju smo smatrali da smo zapravo puno razvijeniji od nje, ih je bilo 2012. 16,7%. U apsolutnom broju onih u Poljskoj koji su na najnaprednijim razinama pismenosti je više nego što je učenika u jednoj generaciji u Hrvatskoj. U Estoniji ih je 14,6%, a u Švicarskoj ih je 24,6%. Političke elite i političari koji se brinu o ne znam kakvim stvarima, koji nemaju veze sa stvarnošću ljudi, sa životom nastavnika, sa životom njihove djece i sve druge djece, zanemaruju ove podatke. U ovim podacima se krije zapravo budućnost ove regije, ove zemlje i ovih zemalja u odnosu na druge zemlje. Tu se krije zapravo konkurentnost, da li kao zemlja uopće možemo konkurirati u svijetu. Kada pitate djecu u Hrvatskoj, učenike, šta je za njih važno i pitate ih da li je važno da budeš u Hrvatskoj, da budeš, nažalost, to je njihova vrijednosna kategorija, da budeš bogat ili da budeš financijski uspješan ili poznat, da li je za to važno da budeš uspješan u učenju? Djeca će vam, odnosno učenici će vam sa 14 godina reći ne. Isto tako će vam reći da je za upis na fakultetu u Hrvatskoj važnije su neke druge stvari od sposobnosti učenja. U Hrvatskoj, a ne vjerujem da je drugačije ni drugdje, zapravo obrazovanje i ljudski potencijal nisu na cijeni. Prethodne 2 godine, možda i znate, neki od vas vjerojatno i znaju, ja sam vodio cjelovitu kurikularnu reformu, pokušaj promjene sustava u Republici Hrvatskoj. U toj cjelovitoj kurikularnoj reformi sudjelovalo je 55 stručnih radnih skupina, sudjelovalo je oko 550 nastavnika, akademskih građana, sudjelovalo je i izradilo u nekakvom roku 55 prijedloga kurikularnih dokumenata. Te dokumente smo pokušali napraviti na sljedeći način, koji je važan i za rano napuštanje školovanja. Sve smo izabrali po javnom pozivu, nastavnik se mogao javiti iz bilo kojeg sela u Hrvatskoj i sudjelovati u pisanju kurikuluma. Radilo se o pravoj kombinaciji 2 jednako vrijedne perspektive, akademske i praktičarske. Svi su plaćeni po izvršenom zadatku, radilo se u računalnom obliku, u online okruženju, radilo se o širokom konzultativnom procesu, bez miješanja politike i pokušali smo napraviti ovo. Htjeli smo da sustav obrazovanja u Republici Hrvatskoj, nastavnici su htjeli i akademici, da bude takav, da razvija kod djece i kod mladih osoba rješavanje problema i donošenje odluka. Da klinac zna riješiti problem, da se može suočiti sa problemom i donijeti odluku. Željeli smo razviti metakognitivne vještine, vještine učenja, vještine toga kako učiti, vještina regulacije okruženja za učenje. Željeli smo kod djece razviti kritičko mišljenje, kreativnost i inovativnost. Kao oblike rada u 21. stoljeću naglasili smo komunikaciju i suradnju, bez koje u 21. stoljeću neće moći biti uopće funkcioniranja niti pojedinca, niti društva. Potom informacijsku i digitalnu pismenost. Kao važan element za rano napuštanje školovanja naglasili smo sljedeće elemente vezane uz osobni i socijalni razvoj. To su upravljanje sobom, upravljanje obrazovnim i profesionalnim razvojem, povezivanje s drugima i aktivno građanstvo. U pozadini takve slike čovjeka, odnosno u pozadini takvih kompetencija, bila je slika mladog čovjeka koji je sposoban učiti, koji je sposoban raditi, koji je sposoban uvažavati drugoga, koji je sposoban doprinositi zajednici, koji je sposoban raditi. U pozadini te vizije takve mlade osobe bile su sljedeće vrijednosti. Znanje nasuprot općeg neznanja koje vlada Balkanom. Integritet nasuprot općeg licemjerja koje vlada Balkanom. Solidarnost nasuprot opće nesolidarnosti koje vlada Balkanom. Poštivanje sebe da bi mogao poštivati drugoga. Zdravlje kao osnovni element zdrave zajednice. Identitet da mlada osoba zna da je iz određenog sela, da zna da je iz određenog grada, da zna da je iz Srbije ako treba ili iz Hrvatske, da zna da je iz Europske unije, da zna da je građanin svijeta i da može pomiriti te identitete. Poduzetnost kao vrijednost ne u jeftinom, balkanskom, prodaja, kupovina tipu, nego poduzetnost da se mlada osoba, ali i nastavnik može aktivirati, da zna prepoznati neku potrebu i da zna aktivirati vlastiti resurs i preuzeti nekakav razuman rizik. Ti ljudi i mi koji smo radili na tome smo željeli napraviti takav sustav koji bi odgovarao mladim osobama, koji bi odgovarao svemu onome o čemu sam govorio na engleskom jeziku, koji bi imao fleksibilan kurikulum, koji bi imao kurikulum koji je zapravo zanimljiv, u kojem nastavnici su zapravo oni koji vode taj cijeli proces, u kojima je dana odgovornost, kojima je dana autonomija da zapravo kao profesionalci izgrade ono što jesu, svoj profesionalni identitet. Postala je široka društvena podrška ovom procesu. Svi smo se vodili idejom boljeg sustava odgoja i obrazovanja, boljih rješenja bez obzira na statistiku koja govori da smo u nekim elementima puno napredniji od ostatka svijeta, sa jednom jedinom idejom, a idejom znači boljeg sustava odgoja i obrazovanja i boljeg društva. 1.6.2016. godine dogodio se drugi najveći protest u povijesti Republike Hrvatske. Taj protest je znakovit i u europskim terminima. To je valjda jedini protest koji se dogodio za neku reformu. Desio se protest za ovu reformu o kojoj sam vam govorio, međutim, od 1.6. do 5.9. kad je počela škola, nije se dogodilo ništa. Djeca su i dalje uče isto, nastavnici i dalje uče isto. Ako zamislite, jedno iskreno, hrabro, otvoreno, uključivo, solidarno društvo. Nazovite ga hrvatskim, nazovite ga srpskim, nazovite ga bugarskim, islandskim ili irskim. I to društvo koje je spremno pokušati i pogriješiti. I opet pokušati. Nakon pogreške. I onda možda uspjeti. Nemate vi ništa za izgubiti. Ni Hrvatska, ni Srbija, ni niko. Osim vlastite glave. A nju smo, ako se slažete ili ne, zapravo već odavno izgubili. Ove zemlje mogu biti sve. Mogu biti puno bolje nego što jesu. Nastavnici mogu imati puno bolje uvjete nego što imaju. Političari bi trebali puno više pažnje obraćati obrazovanju. Ove zemlje mogu biti sve. I one su puno bolje nego što mislimo da jesu. I ja osobno mislim da je vrijeme da se neke stvari promijene i da ove zemlje, Hrvatska, Srbija, Slovenija, kako god, Bosna i Hercegovina, sve te zemlje zapravo, postanu ono što su i prije bile. A to je jedna zdrava osnova razvoja ljudskog potencijala, jedna zdrava osnova zapravo razuma, ako hoćete, i potencijala i te Evropske unije, ali i cijeloga svijeta. Hvala vam.
Hvala gospodinu Jokiću. Vreme je za pitanja i za njega i za Paula Downsa. Jedno je stiglo i preko Twittera, pa možda da počnemo od toga. Odavde je od nekog od učesnika ove konferencije u stvari. Pitanje je za gospodina Downsa da nam navede jedan primjer dobre prakse o uključivanju roditelja iz marginalizovanih grupa u život nekih škola, odnosno rad u školama, pa izvolite ako ste razumeli.
Again, when you're talking about parental involvement, parents are not all the same. So there's not just one size fits all approach. So we need to see the different kinds of parents and have different strategies for the different kinds of parents. So I want to go back to the triangle model I put up to say, so there are parents of chronic need, high risk group, intergenerational, drug use, poverty, etc. Then you have another group of moderate risk. So the examples that I could give from Ireland may be very good for one group of parents, but not so good for another group of parents. So one model which is used a lot in Ireland is the homeschool liaison teacher, which is a particular person who works with parents to help them have more voice in the school and to help their education. So that has been going for a long time. So that would also help parenting programs, you know, giving parents parenting skills advice on how to communicate with their angry, sulking teenager. So you have those approaches, and you also have parent literacy approaches also at school level. But the criticism of the homeschool liaison scheme is that it has not really helped parents really change school policies, that bit got forgotten in the scheme. I would argue there's another very good model called An Cosan, C-O-S-A-N, and that is a community lifelong learning centre in an area of high poverty in Ireland. And that community lifelong learning centre particularly focused on a lot of mothers whose children are in school but who have low education levels and who come together for a mixture of classes. So it could be classes on arts or cookery or politics. It could be on anything that interests them. But then there could also be exam type classes. So it mixes non-formal and formal education in a community setting. So a community lifelong learning centre that reaches out to the community. So it brings people who are very nervous about going near a school or near a education setting. They had a lot of fear, a lot of barriers, and it's to bring that group in and get them to see that they can be a success in education, that they have a voice and that their voice is important. So that project is called An Cosan, A-N-C-O-S-A-N. I think that is a model of international good practice.
Hvala gospodinu Dansu. Ima li još neko pitanje? Ja bih pitao gospodina Jokića, dok se neko ne javi, da li imate odgovor za onaj podatak da je 12,7 dečaka naspram 9,5% devojčica izašlo iz školovanja? Koji je tu uzrok, s obzirom da više dečaka napušta školu, a onda kada se škola završi, kada se stignu zapošljavanja, onda su nekako muškarci bolje nagrađeni i bolje plaćeni za iste poslove koje rade kao i žene. Da li je to stvar rodne neravnopravnosti ili su neki drugi uzroci?
Pa ovako, pitanje je složeno. Znači, ovo, kao što sam pokušao reći, na razini Evropske unije stvar je vrlo heterogena. Heterogena je na razini pojedine nacije. Međutim, puno je tu razloga. Znači, neki su tradicionalni u obrazovanju, neki idu iz samog obrazovanja, odnosno činjenice da je obrazovanje u nekim elementima više zapravo usmjereno ili, da tako kažem, prilagođeno djevojčicama nego dječacima, da potiče neka ponašanja koja su zapravo više, da tako kažem, skloni, ne bih htio stereotipizirati, ali zapravo na neki način odgovaraju nekim osobinama koje i u samim obiteljima se njeguju kod odgoja djevojčica i dječaka. Međutim, situacija je iz perspektive same radne snage, znači iz perspektive tržišta rada, koji u određenim trenucima i u određenim zemljama za fizičke poslove, kojima zapravo su opet sad stereotipno skloniji muškarci, odnosno dječaci, uzima dio radne snage, odnosno dio muškaraca se već i nakon osnovne škole odlučuje ići na posao ukoliko posla ima. Sad je pitanje zapravo da li društvo, ja tu otvaram opet pitanje, da li društvo treba tolerirati to? Da li je na neki način uopće činjenica da od svih želimo da završe srednju školu, da li je ona sama po sebi ispravna? Drugo je pitanje koje se tu postavlja, da li postoji prirodna granica ispadanja iz školovanja? Jer ako, pazite, Hrvatska, ako su ovi podaci točni, a nema razloga da ne budu točni, podatak od 2,7% je zapravo, znate, to je gotovo apsolut. Mislim, nije za očekivati da imate 0,0% ispadanje iz školovanja. Međutim, ako imate, kao što neke zemlje imaju, ispadanje od 20 ili 30% recimo muškaraca, odnosno učenika iz školovanja, onda je to vrlo ozbiljan socijalni problem, kao što sam rekao, osobni problem, obiteljski problem kasnije, a kasnije zapravo u razvoju, tehnološkom razvoju, u budućem tehnološko-industrijskom razvoju, to je naravno problem i pitanja radne snage, odnosno ekonomski problem.
Gledam da li ima pitanja. Ima u publici, izvolite. Evo sad će mikrofon. Iza vas.
Mene zanima, koliko mi je poznato, u Hrvatskoj je srednjoškolsko obrazovanje obavezno. Nije. Znači, ipak nije. Dobro. Onda, okej.
Na to pitanje, znam na šta ciljate. Znači, da li zapravo legalnost, da li obvezivanje, odnosno državna obveza završetka školovanja utječe na smanjenje ispadanja iz školovanja? Na ovim prostorima zapravo ne. Naime, imali ste i do sada u bivšoj Jugoslaviji, imali ste zakonsku obvezu od ne znam od koje godine, od 50 ili ranije, završetka osnovnog školovanja. Ili ne znam koje. Pa su svejedno ljudi nisu završavali osnovnu školu. Više je tu razloga. S jedne strane govori o ljudima, ali još više govori o državama. Znači, države i kad donose zakone, ne uspijevaju provesti te zakone na način na koji su ih donijele. Što zapravo govori u dugoročno, opet ako hoćete, oprostite me, vi koji me ne znate, ja vrlo otvoreno govorim, pa govori zapravo o licemjeru zakonodavca. Znači, zakonodavac gotovo redovno unaprijed ide sa rješenjem za koje zna da neće biti ispoštovano. A nema opet mehanizme, ne ustrojava mehanizme kojima bi zapravo kontroliralo, odnosno poticalo ispunjenje zakona.
Dobar dan, ja imam pitanje za oba govornika, ako je ovo uključeno, jeste. Mene zanimaju implikacije svega ovoga o čemu se govorilo po inicijalno obrazovanje nastavnika. Po mogućstvu, možda i neka dobra praksa ili primer. Initial...
Sure. I think there are a few clear messages, and the European Commission, I think, has also developed documents on this also. So one is, do we have teachers who are prepared for teaching in the schools of high poverty? Yeah. So do they have practical placements in those schools? You know, so you can answer that better than me. Does this happen now, that it is routine that you would go into a school maybe with different ethnic groups or with higher rates of early school leaving, so students are comfortable in that environment? So for example, I teach in a college of education, so we run courses where we bring our students into the areas of highest poverty, and many of our students, their preference is to work in those areas in the future. They want to work there, not in the schools with the wealthy children. So I think one thing is practical placements in these schools. Also, you know, the one I've emphasized in the presentation is conflict resolution skills for teachers. I might quote the rock star Marilyn Manson here. Yeah, Marilyn Manson was accused by George W. Bush of being the biggest threat to American teenagers since the disease polio. And he was asked, what advice do you have for American teenagers today? And he said, I don't have any advice, but I would listen to them. So the listening skills of teachers, so that teachers, I see it with my student teachers, that they're full of answers and instructions, but they don't ask questions that invite conversation and to listen. So the questioning and listening skills of teachers, conflict resolution skills, restorative practice, restorative justice skills that are also very important. Non-bullying, bullying prevention skills.
You have to turn off your mic.
Sorry.
Pa ovako, mislim da su ogromne su implikacije naravno na obrazovanje nastavnika i kako inicijalno, tako i ovo kontinuirano profesionalno osposobljavanje nastavnika. Mislim da države ne bi trebale kretati u ovakve promjene ili u veće promjene bez da zapravo imaju jasan plan kako će doći do nastavnika, kako će ih pripremiti da neke stvari promijene. Puno puta je i u Hrvatskoj bilo takvih promjena koje su na neki način nametnute u škole. Bilo politički, bilo ako hoćete financijski, u tom trenutku se dobio novac za neke stvari, spuštene su u školi su na neki način prihvaćene kao takve, međutim nemate mehanizme kojima bi se oni efikasno izvodili. Ono što smo mi ovdje htjeli je zapravo kroz višegodišnji period, od jedno 5 do 10 godina, kontinuirano osposobljavati nastavnike. Za to Hrvatska trenutno čak pristupanjem Europskoj uniji ima novac. Na neki način doći do svake škole, raditi sa školom, upravo na način na koji on i koji je Paul bio opisao. Uzeti taj whole school approach, umrežiti škole u određenoj lokalnoj zajednici zapravo i onda napraviti opet mreže između tih lokalnih zajednica u vezi određenih tema. Ovo je bila ozbiljna tema, znači tema zapravo promjene školovanja. Međutim, ovo što je rekao i Paul, to je vrlo vrijedno. Na neki način kao društvo i kao ljudi sve manje postavljamo pitanja. Sve manje zapravo kroz to obrazovanje, premda ne napuštamo školovanje, to je zanimljivo. Na ovim prostorima ne napuštamo školovanje, međutim nismo zadovoljni školom. Ne napuštamo školovanje, a zapravo kroz školu nekako, ako hoćete, sjedimo i provodimo te godine u nedostatku nečeg boljega ili čekajući boljim. Tu smo zapravo htjeli na ovaj način promijeniti tu paradigmu. Paradigmu da se u školi kritički misli, da se u školi rješava problem, da se škola odmakne od faktografskog, ne znam da li u Srbiji tako, mislim da zapravo je, da se odmakne od faktografskog upamćivanja i reprodukcije ka nekakvim višim kognitivnim procesima. I to ne samo iz neke fiks ideje Evropske unije ili ne znam čega, nego iz ideje da zapravo u 21. stoljeću bez toga ne možeš ništa. Znate, pametnim telefonima koje svako od vas ovdje ima i gleda, svaki učenik evo sada može doći do bilo koje informacije koje bi 60-ih, 70-ih, 80-ih i 90-ih godina bila sadržaj škole. Ako se škola od toga ne odmakne, znate, ona dugoročno gubi bilo kakvu nadu. To je pitanje do or die, zapravo. Ali ljudi to teško shvatiti, naravno. Treba vremena.
I ako smijem da se...
One other last point on this, that a colleague of mine who's very well known internationally on literacy intervention programs, she said to me that she's designing this program and she's becoming frustrated because she does not see big changes or only in some schools. And she's come to the conclusion that the big change needed was for more democratic, active learning approaches. So the teachers which have the active learning democracy in their classroom, they are making the big changes even around literacy. But if you have a program, but you don't have democracy and relational approaches in the classroom, then even the best programs will be blocked. So that's what we need to change in our teacher preparation for more democracy in the classroom.
Imamo jedno pitanje preko Twittera za gospodina Jokića, ali bih voleo da nastavimo samo u ovom smeru. Obojice ste pominjali važnost podrške i nastavnicima i učenicima. I obojice ste govorili, pogotovo gospodin Jokić, o solidarnosti, o nedostatku solidarnosti u našim društvima. Gospodin Downs je pričao o kursevima, kako to mi kažemo, obuzdavanja besa, je li tako, anger management, i za nastavnike i za decu. Da li je možda rešenje u tom, kako ste vi malo čas rekli, gospodine Jokiću, odmicanju od faktografskog, a učenju nekih drugih, finijih veština, dakle da svi zajedno, i nastavnici i učenici uče kako da bolje prepoznaju i svoje i tuđe emocije, kako da reaguju na njih i kako da bolje iskažu svoje emocije. Uopšte, da li bi trebalo malo više da vežbamo tu emotivnu podršku i solidarnost? Da li škola treba tome da nas uči, a manje ovim faktima koje možemo naći preko pametnih telefona?
Pa škola bi nas trebala učiti jednome i drugome. Znači, sa ovog aspekta, ovih, kao što kažeš, osobnih ili socijalnih vještina ili emocionalnih vještina, mislim da je škola u potpunosti zapravo, barem na balkanskim prostorima, na neki način davno u nekim prošlim vremenima. Sigurno je da bi se ti elementi međupredmetnih tema, elementi stvari koje se tiču održivog razvoja, tiču se osobnog i socijalnog razvoja, tiču se elemenata poduzetništva, tiču se elemenata zdravlja koje uključuje i mentalno zdravlje, da bi to socijalno zdravlje, društveno zdravlje, na neki način da bi to trebalo ući u škole i to trebalo ući u škole, ali na primjeren jedan način, na način da zapravo opet nastavnici zajednički rade. Međutim, ovo kad smo govorili o faktografiji, to je važno. Na neki način nitko ne govori da ne bi trebao postojati ovakav predmetna podjela kakva postoji na ovim prostorima. Međutim, što se uči u tim predmetima? Kako se uči i poučava te predmete? To je ono što treba promijeniti. Naime, ako su vam udžbenici, ako nastavnici to predaju tako da zapravo učenike vode kroz jedan kroz drill koji je na neki način zastario, koji ne odgovara niti svijetu rada, niti životu, onda tu nema sreće. Ono što bi trebalo napraviti je sigurno zapravo drugačije tematski konceptualizirati neke stvari. Daću vam primjer recimo fizike kao predmeta. U fizici kao predmetu imate klasičnu opet situaciju da je ona, što se tiče stava, na neki način spolno podijeljena, odnosno imate djevojčice koje slabije imaju, naročito kako se odmiče obrazovanje, afinitet prema fizici je značajno manji nego dječaka. Jedan od razloga i kako razvijene zemlje tome pristupaju je zapravo da na drugačiji način pristupe poučavanju fizike. Fiziku možete poučavati, znate, ili elemente mehanike kroz ples, kroz balet. Kemiju možete proučavati kroz doping, pa onda uključujete elemente građanstva, elemente sporta, elemente moralne, etičke prosudbe i tako dalje. Znate, to onda više nije kemija samo. Ili nije kemija čestice kod dopinga, tijela, biologije ili ne znam čega. To onda postaje nešto drugo. To je onda škola. Ne?
So the phrase soft skills is, I think, certainly a good way to express those social, emotional, relational skills. And they are a big opportunity, you know, in the workplace. There's a huge need for this for better functioning workplaces. So this is not really a political issue. Social and emotional skills and awarenesses is a win-win situation, whether from an employer's perspective, from you know, a social inclusion, poverty perspective. It's a no-brainer, you know, that we would build this into the system. What I would say is about the anger management point, that the students' voices in the presentation I gave who requested anger management courses for teachers, that was because they were getting anger management for themselves. They were getting the language of emotional awareness, of turn-taking, of, you know, listening to others, of empathy. So they were seeing this themselves. They were realizing that you have to control your impulses. You can't act on impulse the whole time, you know, to minimize aggression and other things. So I think when they could see that they need those skills themselves, the students, they were asking the question, you know, or do the teachers have these skills also? So actually it's about systems of communication. Can we improve our systems of communication? And it's not that expensive to do. It could be done with a good social policy.
Hvala vam. I pitanje za gospodina Jokića je bilo preko Twittera vezano za primjer iz Evropske unije i umrežavanje dobrih praksi. Sad je to nestalo sa zida ovde, a ja nisam zapisao, pa se izvinjavam. Ako neko može da pronađe, bio bih mu zahvalan, ali da, dobro.
Mislim, pitanje se ticalo primjera dobre prakse, odnosno razmjene primjene dobre prakse u Evropskoj uniji. Razmjena primjene dobre prakse je naravno važna i u Evropskoj uniji i mislim da se od toga može puno naučiti. Mislim da bi bila još važnija na ovim prostorima, na prostorima koje su imale slične, odnosno izašle su iz istog praktički obrazovnog sustava i mislim da se od toga puno može naučiti. Međutim, ja sam tu, ako opet mogu malo biti, opet malo skeptičan. Ako slijedite ovo sve što je bilo prije rečeno, znači ako postoji potreba za adaptaciju regionalnom, lokalnom kontekstu koji je čak nekada i mikrolokacija, onda se od primjera dobre prakse naravno može naučiti. Međutim, prenijeti dobru praksu kao takvu u sam lokalitet je pogrešno. Ja mislim da zapravo ne postoje sustavi koje možete preslikati na vaš sustav. Ne postoje na nacionalnoj razini. Znate, ljudi često govore, ne znam, irski sustav je dobar u nekim aspektima. Finsko obrazovanje je super. Austrijsko ili njemačko strukovno obrazovanje je super, pa ajmo onda ga u Srbiju, Hrvatsku, Bosnu, Makedoniju ili ne znam koju zemlju samo uzeti. Pa to vam baš tako ne ide, ne? Jer sustavi su vrlo kompleksne stvari. Oni uključuju ljude, uključuju zgrade, ali uključuju ljude. A ti ljudi imaju i nekakve karakteristike. Oni imaju i nekakvo obrazovanje, imaju i nekakav etos i nekakvu, ako hoćete, emocionalnu potku. Ako na neki način ne adaptirate određena rješenja koja su dobra, ako ih ne prilagodite i to na značajan način, onda zapravo dugoročno opet nećete uspjeti.
Sure. I agree that, you know, local contexts, of course, are vital, and local ownership is absolutely, you know, central. I think I would make a distinction, though, between the what question and the how question, okay? So the what question for early school leaving would be, you know, are you addressing this issue? So, for example, say sleep in schools, okay? Is this a problem or not in your local area? Now, it may not be, but you're asking the question, or something else, you know, whatever the issue is. So the what question is something which I think does transfer to other across contexts. So ask what. How you then devolve a solution to that depends on local circumstances. So I would argue that the solutions need to be local, the how, but the what, where you're looking at a strategy, needs to recognize that there are common patterns across systems. So when you're identifying an issue, there are lessons from other contexts, but the solutions, the how, is for local contexts.
Hvala i na pitanjima i na odgovorima. Vreme je za pauzu, malkice smo je skratili, ali mislim da niko ne želi jer smo dobili sjajne odgovore. Vidimo se ovde u 15 do 12 i nastavljamo rad. Hvala. Da ne bismo remetili satnicu. Nastavljamo, dakle, sa još dve polusatne prezentacije. Dakle, forma će biti ista kao i u prethodnoj sesiji. Prvo ćemo čuti predavanja od nekih 25 do 30 minuta, potom odmah slede pitanja i odgovori. Prvo će nam se u ovom delu u kome govorimo o pristupima sprečavanju ranog napuštanja školovanja i osipanja učenika obratiti gospođa Marijan Hini, članica tima višeg menadžmenta službe za pomoć u obrazovanju TUSLA. Ona definiše ciljeve, ishode i pokazatelje učinka za uspešno sprovođenje inicijativa za pomoć u obrazovanju na nivou škola, radi i na razvijanju i sprovođenju sveobuhvatnih programa obuke za zaposlene koji rade u obrazovanju i za rukovodstva škola, biće vrlo zanimljivo čuti sve to. Odgovorna je za vođenje učenja i podučavanja, sprovođenje reforme nastavnog plana i programa i upravljanje nastavnim i nenastavnim osobljem. Marijan će predstaviti iskustvo Agencije za dete i porodicu, koja je na dobar način povezala različite sektore i sada imaju jedinstven, koordinisan pristup ka svakom učeniku. Molim gospođu Hini da nam se obrati. The floor is yours, Ms. Hini. Let me just, samo da, okay.
To jeste.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to talk to you today about the Irish experience of working to prevent early school leaving and dropout, and promoting attendance, good participation and retention in the system. I think that we have made quite a lot of progress in Ireland over the last number of years. I think in the last 10 years particularly, at the level of policy in the country, we are quite forward-thinking. And the latest national policy framework called Better Outcomes, Brighter Futures sets out very clearly an agenda for how we are going to improve the life chances of children and young people for the next 10 years. A number of very important changes have taken place recently in Ireland in terms of national policy development. The first one was the setting up in 2011 of the Department of Children and Youth Affairs. This was a totally new government department, bringing together key areas of policy and provision for children and young people. And their function now is to oversee the rollout and the implementation of the national policy Better Outcomes and the National Better Outcomes Brighter Future framework. The second important step, I think, that we have made is the setting up of the agency for which I work, called the Child and Family Agency, TUSLA. Now, the name, you may be wondering what it means. It's a combination, it's a made-up name, really. It's from Irish, tus meaning beginning, and law meaning day. So it's really, I suppose, meant to signify new beginnings and a new day. And it's really, I think, quite visionary in terms of what we are trying to achieve for children and young people. So just in terms of the overall vision for the Better Outcomes, Brighter Future document, I think the key elements of this, for me anyway, working in education for the length of time that I have been, is that we must support parents, that schools cannot achieve, and this has been said quite clearly today, that no schools can achieve better outcomes for children on their own. We must include parents. The second most important aspect of it, in my view, is early prevention and early intervention. So we must try to intervene as early as possible to stop problems emerging and to stop them increasing. And I suppose, thirdly, is the importance of quality services. That if we are providing support services for children at risk, then those services must be of high quality. And what are we trying to achieve? What kind of outcomes are we looking for children? Well, obviously, the first one is that they're healthy. Very important. That they're physically healthy, that they're mentally healthy, and that they are, as children should be, they're active. Secondly, that they're achieving their full potential, and that they are allowed to develop according to that potential. Thirdly, that they're safe from harm, that they achieve economic security and opportunity to make a contribution to society, and that they are connected both to their communities, to their neighbourhoods, and ultimately to the wider society. So that is the overarching vision that is now government policy in Ireland. It's quite challenging in terms of how it will be implemented in the future, but I think that the fact that we have a dedicated government department now called the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, and the fact that we have an agency, the Child and Family Agency, with a dedicated budget, I think it will help to go a long way towards achieving those goals and those outcomes in the future. Now, what is the purpose, or why was TUSLA set up? First of all, it was set up, I suppose, as a response to the fact that there was a lot of investment in child welfare, in child education, but quite a lot of, or should I say, a lack of unity in terms of how approaches were being taken and in terms of spending. So we have to try to ensure that services are integrated. So TUSLA is now responsible for both supporting and promoting the welfare, the overall welfare and development and protection of children, to both support and develop the services that we need to keep children in education, to keep them safe, to keep them engaged. And thirdly, making sure that every child in the state attends school. And we have a mandatory school attendance from 6 to 16 under the Education Welfare Act, which was enacted in 2000. Also inbuilt in the vision of and the remit of TUSLA, the Child and Family Agency, is the idea of consultation with children and the involvement of children in decision making. So this was mentioned by Paul and also by Boris this morning, that we cannot overlook the importance of children's voice being heard. Interagency collaboration, where agencies that previously were funded from several different sources are now being funded through TUSLA, the Child and Family Agency, and hopefully through that there will be more transparency, better use of resources and more efficiency, and obviously cost effectiveness as well. And finally then, that services that are being commissioned has to be done through TUSLA in terms of both cost effectiveness and suitability. Now, I think it's very important to understand that in Ireland we have a dedicated piece of legislation surrounding the education of children. And it has a number of important characteristics. Firstly, that it emphasises the role of attendance, participation and retention. So it's not just about children sitting in seats in school. They must be participating, and hopefully they will stay in the system. It emphasises equality of access. It emphasises partnership between parents, schools, owners of schools, because we have some private schools obviously, students and the community. It emphasises the fact that schools must provide quality education, quality curriculum, and that they develop all the kinds of skills that were mentioned earlier, social skills, emotional skills, as well as both literacy and numeracy, and that schools are accountable to the state and to parents and to the students. And it also outlines the responsibility of the education welfare officers, who are the people employed by the Child and Family Agency to ensure that children are attending school. So we have a dedicated cohort of officers employed by the Child and Family Agency, whose job it is to support the parents, particularly of students who are not attending, who are inclined to drop out, and ultimately those education welfare officers have the power to take legal action against parents. So the Education Act 2000 is a very important piece of legislation which underpins the state's approach to ensuring that children attend school and that they stay in school. So just very briefly to tell you what the onus that this Act places on parents. It insists that it states that parents must ensure that their child attends school on each school day. If the child does not attend, then the parent must notify the principal, and the parents then, if they're having difficulties, may request advice from the Education Welfare Services. So, very important pieces of responsibility placed on parents under this particular Act. The schools also then have responsibilities. So, the schools, all schools in the state, must notify their local education welfare officer if a student misses more than 20 days. So, nationally, this is national policy, 20 days, the Education Welfare Services must be notified. Secondly, if a child is suspended by the school for 6 days, then the Education Welfare Officer must be notified. If a student is taken off the school register, the Welfare Officer must be notified. And finally, that if the principal of a school thinks that a child is not attending or at risk of not attending, then the Education Welfare Officer must be notified. And then they become directly involved with the parents and with the student and with the school in trying to ensure that child does not disengage from the school. So that's just in terms of the Child and Family Agency, its role, and then the Education Welfare Act. Now, prior to all of this happening, which is since 2000, the Education Welfare Act, then 2014, the establishment of the Child and Family Agency. Prior to that, in 2005, the Department of Education brought in a programme for the most disadvantaged schools in the state called the DESH programme. Sorry. Now, the DESH programme is short for Delivering Equality of Opportunity in Schools. And it has been, I think, extremely successful in terms of its outcomes. So what is this programme about? Well, it first of all identified the schools that were serving areas of high disadvantage. So areas where traditionally there would have been high unemployment, early school leaving, poverty, social housing, a lot of social issues. And the particular programme has a number of strands, but one of them is where the schools receive extra financial supports, because our schools operate on the basis of capitation. So the bigger the schools, obviously, the more funding they get. So the schools that are identified as being in this particular programme get extra funding. And they also get 2 extra support services. One is called the Home School Liaison Service, and the second one is called the School Completion Programme. Now, in terms of, just how this operates, if you look at the intervention continuum that most people understand in terms of supporting those who need support, basically on the, now I'm going ahead of myself here, we try to intervene proportionately where people need supports. So on the red line at the top, you are looking at, on the left, the children who can be supported by the general curriculum in school and by their parents, and who are generally achieving reasonably well. As you move towards the right, we are coming to the more targeted interventions that are required, and at the very extreme right, the intensive interventions. So all services that we provide should be operating on the basis of moving children from the intense back along towards the universal. So in other words, we try to intervene proportionately so that we can move the children back, that they can be supported by the general curriculum, by their parents, by the school policy, and by their peers and by the community and so on. So in all schools, the education welfare officers have a role. Obviously, in some schools, that role is more significant because there is a higher level of dropout, a higher level of absenteeism. And in the schools that I spoke about, the DESH schools, which are approximately over 600 schools, they have the additional supports of the school completion programme and the home school liaison service. So 2 very important extra pieces of support in these significantly disadvantaged schools. So just in terms of what these supports are, the home school liaison, community liaison service is basically teachers who are assigned for a 5-year period, teachers in the schools who are assigned for a 5-year period to work specifically with the parents. So what do? They go out on home visits. It's an outreach programme from the schools. They work to help parents with their parenting skills. They try to involve them in curricular activities where they bring parents into the classes to work with their children on maths, on reading, very simple reading programs, and maths for fun and so on. They also engage parents in fun activities, in leisure activities, so that bit by bit they're breaking down the barriers between the school and the home. So that has been extremely successful, and that is in operation since 1990, and it was mainstreamed in the mid-90s, and it is in all of the schools now that are called DESH schools, where this particular extra funding and extra supports have been given. So that's the first part of that extra support after the financial support. And then the second part is the school completion programme, which provides in-school supports specifically for targeted students who are at risk. So they provide homework support, counselling services, in-school activities, leisure-type activities. They are run at a local level, these school completion programmes, by a management committee comprising of community members, school principals, homeschool liaison coordinators, and also representatives of the voluntary and statutory agencies. So two important strands of support, one focused on the parents and one focused on the pupils. And they work hand in hand with the same cohorts of pupils, because the targeting of these particular pupils is extremely important. It's not a universal support for everybody, it's for the most disadvantaged and those most at risk. And then finally, the welfare services, as I've already said, the education welfare officers, statutory service, focusing on preventative measures, working closely with the parents, and finally, obviously, if they don't succeed, taking legal action, taking parents to court if they do not send their children to school. Now, in terms of success rates in Ireland in recent times, I think statistically we have made huge improvements. There currently 91% of students complete Leaving Cert, which is the final exam at secondary school level, second level. And that has gone up from 83% in 2006. So in 10 years, there's been a major improvement in school attendance. Now, that's not obviously simply as a result of interventions. It's a combination of the fact that Ireland economically was quite successful in the, I suppose, late 90s, early 2000s, before the recession. So combination of factors, but certainly the interventions have had a significant impact on attendance. In DEIS schools, the schools that I mentioned, which have the highest levels of disadvantage, the completion rate is 82%, and that has gone up from 68%. So again, we can see that these particular interventions are actually having a significant impact on our attendance and completion rates. Attendance at primary school is almost 95%, and post-primary is 83%. So that's in the DEIS schools. Now again, I think it's common right across Europe is that we would have probably the same problems with our Roma and traveller populations, particularly at second level. Attendance rates at primary level for traveller children has improved quite a lot. Roma and traveller children at second level, it's still quite problematic, despite targeted interventions and despite everything that is being done. Now, just in terms of the kind of value systems, and I think it's important to think in terms of the values that as a society we espouse, and particularly for these integrated services that are under the Child and Family Agency now. And it took us quite a long time to actually agree these core values. And I think they're important because if you don't have a core value system, then it's very difficult to implement proper strategies to prevent dropout and to promote attendance. So the first one is obviously focus on education. And we all know how important education is, and to improve children's potential through our services. So that's the first one. Developing solutions with children and families. And again, the importance of involvement of children and families, very important. We can't underestimate how important it is that both children and their parents have to be part of the solution, have to be part of the plan, have to be part of the strategies that we're planning. Responding in a proportionate manner, that some children will need not much support, they will need a little, they may only need occasional support. There are others then who will need very intensive supports, and it may extend right through their whole school career. So again, responding proportionately to the needs of children. Fairness and difference, respect for difference and respect for all. And again, supporting the staff who work with these particular types of difficult situations, difficult families, because it's very challenging. And any teachers and staff who work in areas where there are high levels of disadvantage, high levels of poverty, high levels of dropout, those teachers need support, and they need to be kept very much motivated by recognising that they have a difficult job, a difficult role. They need to be paid properly, they need to be supported by the services, and they need to be supported by us, the people who are leading these agencies and also government departments. The use of evidence as to what works, evidence-based interventions. There is no point in doing things for the sake of doing them and for the sake of being seen to be doing things. We must actually use what works and intervene in a way and using strategies which have proven to be successful. And we are quite good, I think, at sharing good practice, particularly the Homeschool Liaison Service, which I've worked with for several years now, that we work very closely with other schools and other groups of schools to share practice, good practice, and share strategies that actually work. And there is a huge emphasis now on integrated working, working with other services, other agencies, and I think it is now becoming very much the modus operandi of services in Ireland. There are always the challenges of this territorial sort of, how would I say, territoriality with regard to services. But the fact that the Child and Family Agency has been set up, I think, over the coming years should help that. And obviously, we're obviously trying to be as cost effective as possible because there's no point in 20 agencies working with the same families and getting nowhere. So we have to streamline services, and we have to ensure that we're doing it in a cost-effective and efficient manner. So I think it's no harm sometimes to look at the value systems that underpin what we're trying to do, and particularly support the people on the ground who are actually doing the work and trying to actually bring about this kind of change. So we're trying to improve outcomes through coordinated services, early intervention, and efficient use of resources to bring about improved attendance, improved participation, and to ensure children attend and progress onto further education. Now, in terms of how the schools and the families and the children are targeted for these particular interventions, it's fairly clear, I think, that obviously poverty would be very high on the list. So areas where there's a lot of poverty, extreme poverty, housing, poor quality housing, lone parent families, high unemployment rates, substance misuse, poor parenting skills, and obviously the history of the educational experience of parents. So if in a particular area where a lot of the parents would not have gone on to second level school, they would be obviously targeted for extra supports. Where there is a discontinuity between the school and the home, in other words, that there is the parents do not see really any value in education. Absenteeism and school refusal, anger, and Paul spoke about this, anger towards the school, anger towards basically the whole system, behavioural problems, emotional problems, lack of parental support, poor social adjustment, and alienation basically from the school curriculum. So all of those factors would have a bearing on how children are targeted in schools for extra supports. In terms of the homeschool liaison service, it's quite unique in that it is teachers in the schools that they are working in who are assigned to this particular role. And I've already said this, that it is, I think, one of the cornerstones of the success of this particular programme, in that it is actually teachers. Now, I know Paul may not agree with me on this, that it's the fact that it's actually teachers, but we have found over the years that the fact that the homeschool liaison coordinators, they're called, are actually teachers. They have a respectability in the community. They have a sense of being non-threatening. They are respected because they go out from the school as an outreach service to the parents and to the homes. And their focus is building that trust, building involvement, and getting the parents slowly and surely to become more involved in their children's education. So it's a preventative strand, it's a preventative programme. It focuses on active cooperation. So cooperation between the home, the school, the wider community, and also getting parents to understand how they can contribute and how they can support their children's education. And ultimately, to ensure that in doing that, in supporting the parents, that their children will actually attend school, that they will stay on in school, that they will participate, and that they will have improved outcomes. So very much focus on the family as the prime educator, and the family as the support which has to be involved in their children's education. Again, as I said, it's targeted at the most needy. Its focus is very much on early intervention, empowering the parents slowly, so through involvement in the curricular activities in the school, in leisure activities, through the home visitation by the coordinator going out, by pointing them in the direction of services that they may find useful or necessary, and by identifying what their needs are and working with a whole school approach. And this is very important, that it's not just one person, it's trying to, I suppose, be the agent of change in the school in terms of the voice for the parent and helping the parents to understand their potential in their education, in the education of their children. The Department of Education, who employs or who pays the teachers, has now decided in recent times that this post should rotate. So it's a 5-year assignment for teachers who go to take on the role of homeschool coordinator. So that's quite good, in that we now have several young teachers who are very dynamic, who are very innovative, and who are very well equipped to work very closely, who understand the needs of the parents and who work very closely with them. So that's been a very, I think, good thing that they've started to rotate the post, because prior to that, some coordinators were in the job for 10 years, 12 years, so it's better now, I think. Now, the school completion programme, as I said before, works with the students. So the homeschool with the parents, and the school completion programme with the students. And their aim is to improve attendance, improve participation and retention through evidence-based interventions, through targeting, and through working closely in the schools with the students and with the staff in terms of identifying the issues that are problematic. Now, also, going forward, the school completion programme has to be integrated very much into local responses. So, as was said earlier, what may work in Dublin, in the capital, may not work down the country. So we have to be ready, we have to be able, we have to be clear that we must respond to local needs. And we must have that flexibility in our programmes. So while at national level we have to have the support of government, we have to have the funding, we have to have the vision, we also need flexibility at local level to ensure that no one set of interventions is going to work for everybody. And I think that you will see that in your own country in this particular project, that what works in the city will not necessarily work in the country. And we have actually the same issue. And to make sure that we're not duplicating and wasting money, because that is one of the problems, I think, with programmes that are set up to deal particularly with disadvantage, is that we can have several different agencies both funding and working with the same families. And we have to try to avoid that. We have to try to ensure that there is less duplication and a more clear focus and a more clear strategy. How am I doing? This time. Okay. So I would just finish up by saying that I am very optimistic about the way that we have, I suppose, tried to integrate our services. I am very optimistic about the fact that at government level we have a clear vision about where we want to get to. The implementation of it will be challenging, particularly I think the sharing of data across different service providers, but that at least we have now moved towards one agency that is both responsible for welfare, protection, health, and hopefully, I think, in the future, improving children's chances. So thank you for listening.
Hvala gospođi Hini na ovoj prezentaciji. Odmah da vas pitam, ima li pitanja? Aha, evo jedno pitanje. Sačekajte samo da stigne mikrofon do vas.
Dobar dan. Mene pre svega zanima koliko su medijatori uključeni da povezuju osnovne i srednje škole, odnosno daju informacije, jer bi nama, srednjim školama, bi bilo velikog značaja da nam se ukaže možda na decu koja su imala nekih problema i sa kojima je rađeno. Pa me zanima da li medijatori, znači sada kod vas povezuju osnovne i srednje škole u tom smislu, znači da li su povezani?
Okay. Yes, the homeschool liaison service that I mentioned, in particular geographic areas, so you may have, say, 5-6 schools working in the same area. So the information that is required about children transferring to the secondary school is passed on then to that school. They must pass it on. So if the child does not transfer, then the secondary school knows, and they must advise the education welfare officer who has to chase up, who has to follow this family to see where the child is. Equally, they also pass on information about attendance levels, about issues that might affect that child's attendance and participation. Yeah. So it's really, it's the responsibility of the school, not mediators, but the school, to inform the second level school of the issues that could become problematic.
Dobar dan. Hvala za prezentaciju. Htio bih da vas pitam zašto ovaj DAIŠ, kako ga već izgovaramo, program, zašto se ne nalazi u svim školama? To je prvo pitanje koje vodi ka drugom pitanju. Koliko sprovođenje ovog programa poskupljuje u stvari, ajde kažem, obrazovanje?
Right. The question as to why it was not extended is, I think, probably economic. It identified the most disadvantaged schools. So it's a targeted intervention for the most disadvantaged. In 2017, it is envisaged that it will be extended a bit more, maybe 50 more schools. The cost, yes, it is significant cost. The two programs, the school completion program and the homeschool service, cost 70 million euros per year to run, and then extra capitation, so that's another cost. So it's quite significant, but in terms of outcomes, it's very, very worthwhile, I think.
Imamo jedno pitanje preko Twittera, pa ću zamoliti prevoditeljke da ga prevedu, ja ću da pročitam. Vidite ga ovde gore na vrhu stranice. Kako ste uspostavili aktivnu saradnju između lokalnih institucija i kako motivišete nastavnike za terenski rad?
In terms of motivating the teachers in the homeschool community program, first of all, they must apply, they must be interviewed. They are selected on the basis of their suitability to work with parents of disadvantaged pupils. So the fact that there is now a 5-year turnover, we have very highly motivated teachers in that particular role. Cooperation at local level, we don't have local governments as such, local government areas, but we would have, obviously in some areas cooperation is not as good as it should be because the schools are competing for students. So two schools near one another, one which is a DESH school, there may be a perception among parents that maybe their students are too troublesome or there's too much, the standards are not good. So that is the problem. That is a problem. Parents who may want, are ambitious for their children, may want to send them to a non-DESH school because the perception is that if it's a DESH school, then it's problematic. It has problem students. So that is a problem.
Ako nema pitanja, moram ja da pitam još jednom, izvinjavam se, to mi je profesionalna informacija. Pomenuli ste zakon o obrazovanju koji obavezuje roditelje da decu šalju u školu i pominjali ste ozbiljne kazne za roditelje koji to ne čine. Kakva je bila reakcija u javnosti na ovakve zakonske mere? Pre svega mislim na roditelje. Ne znam da li postoje neka udruženja roditelja kao nevladine organizacije i kako ste uspostavili tu komunikaciju sa njima?
In truth, I think most parents are quite happy that there is a legal obligation to send their children to school. Some parents obviously know that a lot of effort will be made and that it will be a long, long time before they are sanctioned legally. So therefore they're not afraid. And some people believe that the education officers, welfare officers, should have more power. They should have more power and that the judges should imprison parents and fine them quite a lot of money if they do not send their children to school. But the difficulty is that there is inconsistency nationally between the judges in some jurisdictions as to how they deal with parents, and then sometimes the education welfare officers are very frustrated because they will have done everything possible to try to get children to go to school, and there is no punishment really for parents who don't send them.
Thank you. Hvala gospođi Hini, ona će ostati ovde i sačekat će da i gospođa Leticija Antonović završi svoju prezentaciju. Ona je naša sledeća govornica. Radila je u više od 30 zemalja, u poslednjih 20 godina specijalizovala se za evaluaciju pregled sektora, izgradnju politika i kapaciteta sa fokusom na jednakosti u obrazovanju i na inkluziji i kvalitetu. Kao regionalni konsultant za kancelariju UNICEF-a u Ženevi podržava 12 zemalja u regionu, uključujući i Srbiju, uglavnom na temu dece van školskog sistema, napuštanja i osipanja učenika i tako dalje, i tako dalje. Autorka je drugog toma UNICEF-ove serije učešću u obrazovanju i sprečavanju osipanja, unapređenja učešća u obrazovanju i trebalo bi u narednih 20 minuta do pola sata da nam da jedan kratak pregled kakve su to, koje su to dobre prakse i koji to pristupi funkcionišu, a koji ne. Izvolite, gospođo Antonović. I don't see it here, so I guess.
Yes. It's in the folder.
Where is it?
It's in the folder, and it's number 4. Yeah.
Cool.
From beginning. That's it.
That should be fine,
At
right?
this point.
How does that work? Does that work like that? Super, thank you. Right, I'm in a difficult position now. First, because I'm standing between you and lunch. And second, because quite a lot has been said already, so you are going to hear again some of the things that the other presenters have said. But then I guess it's for the best. It means that if we keep on repeating the same messages, they must be true. I would like to start by saying how happy I am here today, and I would like to use a metaphor because dropout prevention often is a bit like climbing a mountain. And we feel that we climb, and the top, we can never see the top. But I would like to ask UNICEF, I would like to ask the Center for Education Policy, and I would like to ask all of you participating schools to just stop climbing for a moment, to turn around and to see the view, to see how much you have climbed in the past 3, 4, 5 years. So just, remember that there is still some climb to be done, but that you've done quite a lot already. I have been asked to talk about what works, effective dropout prevention approaches. It's the $1 million questions, and there's no simple answer to that, and I think that other presenters have made it clear, but I will first try to look at a number of dimensions of effectiveness in the presentation, and then I will look at specific strategies, and I will end by giving you a few insights about UNICEF publication that is about to be published on dropout prevention in the Central and Eastern Europe and Central Asia region that the UNICEF Geneva office is responsible for. First, for dropout prevention to be effective, we need to understand why students drop out in all its complexity. And I think this has been said to some extent this morning. This requires us to understand the child and family-related factors that contribute to dropout, but also to understand the role of the system in failing to maintain students in schools. And by the role of the system, I mean the kind of education, the way education is organized, the school practices, the macro-level factors, legislation, social norms, and so on, which also contribute to dropout. And we also obviously understand, and this has been said quite a lot, what are the experiences of excluded children, and what are the experiences of marginalized families. And this is important that the response interventions are built on this first-hand information and understanding. Another dimension of effectiveness is that we need to have a vision. And in the countries that have been successful are countries that usually have had a shared understanding of the issues. All the actors understand what the phenomenon is, understand what the causes are, and they have a kind of a common language and a common goal
to respond to it. And building that understanding within stakeholders is quite important. We've also learned about the importance of having a long-term political commitment and long-term financial commitment. Change cannot happen overnight, and therefore we need to be consistent and we need to be persistent. A third dimension of effectiveness of dropout prevention measures is the comprehensiveness of these measures, both for individual children and across the system. At the individual level, to be effective, dropout prevention must be based on sound identification mechanisms. We need to know who the children who are dropping out are, and we need to know who the children who are at risk of dropping out are. And based on this, we obviously need to address the specific needs of children and to address them in a holistical manner. And what I quite like about this drawing here, where you can see the child at the center of a support mechanism, is that for me the importance is that the response is not only about trying to solve a problem, but it's also about trying to understand the story of the child, his or her needs, his or her resilience, his or her potential, and his or her talent, so that we move away from labeling children at risk to maybe labeling them at promise, to use a turn of phrase that has been presented in a TED talk recently. At the system level, comprehensive measures also means devising policies and practices that span across prevention, intervention, and compensation. And I won't go through that because Boris presented this morning some of the intervention under each of these trends. A fourth dimension of effectiveness is cross-sector coordination and partnerships. Only when support services are coordinated and collaborate with each other can we respond holistically to the needs of children and their families. And while schools have a key role and responsibility to play in dropout prevention, they can't do it alone. And for the most complex cases, they need also other support services to intervene. And a second reason why I like this drawing here is that you see the student at the center with all the actors organized around him. You can see local officials, teachers, police, maybe people coming from the judiciary, but also health staff, probably parents, peers, and so on. And it's only when we have all these interventions being interconnected and working together that we can reach good results. A last point about the cross-sector coordination is also the notion of partnership. I think effective dropout prevention measures are also those who are harnessing the potential of innovative partnerships, either between local and central governments, but also between schools and the private sector, between schools and local services, between schools and civil society organizations. The last dimension of effectiveness, you have seen it already twice this morning, so it's third time lucky, that I'd like to put forward is the importance of directing resources and efforts where the needs are. And the aim is twofold, is first to ensure that all students can benefit from the academic, the attendance, the behavior, and the emotional support that they need to complete education, and at the same time ensuring that those students who have the most needs can also benefit from the most complex and the most resource-intensive interventions. So this is what we call sometimes a three-tier approach, where you have at the bottom of the pyramid universal interventions, which are low cost and address all students in the schools. And that can be, for instance,
absenteeism management system, it can be interventions to improve the school climate. Then you have targeted interventions, which are a bit more resource intensive, and they aim to focus on specific groups of children, either, for instance, because they are going to receive additional learning support, or because they will be benefiting from a mentoring program. Oops. And then, you have those individual interventions which are much more resource intensive, but also address students with the most complex needs. Now, let's look at a number of specific approaches. I have summarized here 10 approaches, and the reason why I have chosen these 10 is because they are the 10 which I explored in that UNICEF publication I was telling you about, and I will also tell you a few words at the end of this presentation. So some of the approaches are more on the preventive side, and for UNICEF in the region, we insist particularly on starting early, so the importance of preschool education, but also the importance of enrolling in school at the right age. In the region, there are a lot of out-of-school students who are actually students who are entering primary school quite late. So this is also something that has been quite successful, is trying to get the students in primary school at the correct age. Here I have a number of prevention and response interventions. I won't go too much into detail on most of them because I have other slides coming, but I would just like to say something about approaches around reducing financial barriers for students and for schools. We haven't talked a lot about that this morning, and obviously in countries particularly where poverty is a main barrier to education, we do need also to address issues around how students are going to school, transport support, school meal support, sometimes scholarships or bursaries so that students can continue their education. And there's also a big thing about how schools are funded and how the funding of schools is going to match the level of needs that they have. So there's a lot of interesting practices around per capita funding or block grants for schools, which are weighted in a way so that the schools with the most students that needs receive the most funding in order to be able to implement response interventions. I will just also say a few words about learning. I don't have a specific slide afterward for learning support, but obviously we cannot think that students are going to enter school and stay in school if we just want bums on seats. What we want is children to learn, and learning has to be the driver for access. And that's really important to keep this in mind. And obviously there's a range of intervention that can be done, from small group learning support, foreign language classes as in language of instruction, classes for students who do not have the language of instruction as a mother tongue at home, learning to learn. How can we equip students with the skill that they need to learn how to learn, for instance? All these kind of metacognitive skills, life skills, or soft skills, however you want to call them, which are quite important. I just want to say a few details about engaging with parents. We talked a bit about that this morning already, but we know that parental involvement, including fathers' involvement, there's more and more research now about the importance of including fathers in the education of their children, contributes to children development and educational success. And we also know that parental patterns of engagement with services vary greatly. Younger parents, older parents, migrant parents, parents living in poverty, parents who have poor mental health, or parents who, or families with a substance abuse addiction, for instance, will engage differently with services. So we definitely need to develop strategies that are differentiated for different kinds of parents and taking into account their own experience of education, which is often not very good, and which take also into account their own needs, linguistic needs, but also often parents are not necessarily really aware of the education jargon, of the education system, and in order to have a conversation with teachers or school directors, they need to be supported with those issues. There are two main strategies to engage parents. Either the strategies that are trying to bring parents to the school, so that can be school meetings, that can be including parents in curricular activities like Marianne was describing, or strategies that are reaching out to parents, that, like the home liaison officer or for instance, mediators are often used also in this respect. But we also need to support schools to do this. And one important thing is that often engaging with parents is not part of teachers' job description. So we need to include it in job description. We might also want to ensure that school inspection and external evaluation look at how schools are engaging with parents, including the most marginalized parents. We may also want to think about how teachers and school directors are trained on how to engage with parents. And that would include, in some countries, it's quite good and interesting work of including parents, marginalized parents, including them in trainings, either through videos or through proper one-to-one interaction with teachers, so that really teachers and school directors challenge their own perceptions towards traditionally marginalized groups. We've said quite a lot about engaging with students, so I will just say quickly a few words about that. We know research shows here as well that student emotional well-being, student sense of identification with the school, sense of belonging with the school is a key driver for retention and for completion. So there are three key focus, I think, areas relating to engaging with students. The first one is supporting student emotional well-being, and Paul talked a lot about that this morning, so I'm not going to cover it here, but this is really critical that in schools and around the schools we address that issue of psychosocial support and emotional well-being support. The second thing is improving the sense of identification with and belonging to the school. And many effective interventions have been about how to develop constructive relationships between adults and students, either through developing a school ethos, which is based on mutual respect, developing open communication channels between adults in the schools and students, developing discipline policies which are based on conflict resolution, and mentoring programs. Mentoring programs have been very well documented in dropout prevention and can make a difference in the decision of students and families to remain in school because they have a caring adult in the school who can provide support. There are other more traditional interventions which are effective, how to integrate and to include students in school governance, how to develop school projects with students, sports activity, extracurricular activities, and so on. But here what I want to say is that it's often the usual suspects in the school who are benefiting from all these opportunities. So we really need to find a way to support those students at risk to also benefit from this extracurricular activity or other school participation activities so that they can make the most out of it. And the third point would be harnessing the potential of peer support. There are really, really good and interesting approaches around peer tutoring from Israel, for instance, or from Canada, where older children are asked to tutor younger children. And there's also a very good example of peer mentoring practices, and big programs have been evaluated in the US and in the UK. And those programs were particularly interesting because often they were including in the role of the mentor the children who were at risk of dropping out. And when children are put in that mentoring role, they can feel that they are contributing to the school community. They can also feel that they're worth and that they can help others. And that can be very powerful for from some children. I'd like to say a few words about supporting transition between school cycles and actually supporting transition between schools, full stop. This has become increasingly important as we are moving towards an early school leaving agenda where we want children to transit from lower secondary to upper secondary. And for transition to be successful, we need to make sure that students can adjust socially to the new school or to the new level, that students can adjust to the new institution, to the way this institution is organized, and that students can adjust to the curriculum that is delivered. So it's very important when we're trying to support transition that we are looking at all these three different aspects. And this means that before the transition, we have to share a number of information with parents, with students, to help them make the right choice. Subject choice, education pathway choice, school choice, so that we minimize the potential disappointments when students have transited to a school or to a pathway that is not for them. And this is particularly important in vocational education because we have so many children who end up in streams that actually they don't feel comfortable with. And that will lead to a lack of motivation, and that will lead to dropout. It's also important that we are maintaining any kind of support that was providing to students throughout the transition. So let's say that a child was benefiting from mentoring. Let's not change the mentor when he's transitioning to another school. Let's keep that mentor in place for a few months so that the child can adjust, and then maybe we can think about changing the support. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go a bit quickly. That's the last thing I'm going to talk about is the whole school approach. We've mentioned it, but it's really, really critical for me because it brings together the response at the individual level and the systemic response that has to be provided by education systems. Dropout prevention is effective when we are not looking at it as a side project. Dropout prevention is not a project. Dropout prevention is like the core of what schools should do, because at the end of the day, it is about improving attendance, improving learning, improving completion. It is about improving students' emotional well-being. It is about improving the school climate. It is about improving the communication with parents, students, external partners, and so on. So it's important that it's really at the core of what the school is doing. And I just wanted to highlight two key approaches which belong to the whole school approach. The first one is absenteeism management, and that really builds on what Marian has said. But we need to look at how schools record absenteeism and the kind of protocol that they put in place. Who does what when a child is absent, and who does what when a child has been absent for more than 20 days, for instance. And often in our region, this is not really done properly or not done consistently, and that's why we have quite a lot of absenteeism. And the second thing I would like to mention is dropout early warning system. I won't say much because obviously the whole Serbian pilot was based around an early warning system. But this is critical to identify students early so that we can provide the right support. And dropout early warning systems are not the work of a small team in the school. It has to be, the entire school has to be involved in that. Every teacher should know how it works, and every teacher should feel empowered to work through it. This is my thinking now about dropout prevention. And I want to echo what Paul was saying this morning about the what and the how. Obviously, many things work in dropout prevention. And many schools and many local authorities are going to tell you that they are already implementing some of these interventions. And you can think about those as being the square wheel. Yes, we're doing it. But actually, how are you doing it? Could you do it better? Could you do it differently? And this is where I stand now, after having worked with all of you and in other countries for the past 5 years. I actually think that dropout prevention works when professionals are ready to really analyze their own bias, analyze their habits, analyze their practice, and be ready to challenge their own assumptions. And then we can go somewhere. I have 10 seconds left, and I will just finish very quickly on this UNICEF series, because otherwise I'm not going to get paid at the end of the month. So just to let you know that UNICEF Geneva is releasing a new series on education participation and dropout prevention. There are 2 volumes. The first volume focuses on data systems, and Sheena Bell will present this afternoon about it. The second volume provides policy and practice pointers, but basically they are ideas, they are tips, they are examples of what's happening in the region. So not only at European level, but also going all the way to Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan to see what's happening elsewhere. And I just want to say that this second volume is based on the 10 areas that I've briefly mentioned. And they provide lots of ideas, lots of tips, but most importantly, what we wanted to do is not to be prescriptive. What we wanted to do was to inspire people. So we used like about 130 examples. Serbia is very well represented. I think we have 6. And the idea is that those examples will enable you to adapt and to tailor to your local context. So thank you very much. I won't talk about the rest. And good luck with the conference.
Hvala gospođi Antonović na ovoj prezentaciji. Imate li za nju neka pitanja? Pre nego što krenemo na ručak. Ja bih voleo samo da je pitam jednu stvar, budući da već preko ste 5 godina radite i da nadzirete ovde 12 zemalja u regionu, da li primećujete neke tendencije zajedničke i šta je to po čemu biste mogli Srbiju da izdvojite i kako biste okarakterisali? Yes, I'll tell it in English. You've been working in 12 countries in the region. Can you see something which bonds them, which links them, and something about the Serbia specifically?
The countries in the region are very, very, very different. In the region, we have countries like Romania or Bulgaria, which are part of the European Union. We have accessing countries like Serbia, and then we have countries like Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Turkey. So they are all obviously very different, but the thing that is striking is that the issues that professionals are trying to address are the same. We have poverty in most of these countries. We have either ethnic minorities or linguistic minorities which tend to be discriminated in all these countries.
and we have schools which are poorly resourced. We have very motivated teachers, but they're not paid much. And schools do not get a lot of support to go the extra mile that could help students move forward. So there are commonalities, although the countries are different. Something I would like to say about Serbia is that it's very interesting for me to be part of this because I have been following your thinking process for the past 5 years, which I don't tend to do a lot, and that was obviously something quite interesting for me. But I think that what really is a characteristic here is that you are discussing a lot. You are meeting, you are talking, you are trying to understand, you are trying to do things differently. I could say that there's a real will of doing things differently, of learning different practices, and of trying to implement them. And I was really happy visiting the schools in June because I really feel that most of the teachers and most of the school directors had shifted the way they were thinking about students, shifted the way they were thinking about parents, and shifted the way they were thinking about their job.
Thanks, Letitia, for your questions. I have a question for you, and I have a question based on a comment you made, maybe more for everyone else. The question for you is, have you come across much projects on animals in schools or plants and gardens in schools as a way to motivate parents and young people? And the other point, I'm delighted you raised the issue of hunger in school and food in school, because this is, I think, is a very neglected issue at European Commission level. And what I would say is that often children who are hungry in school are going to hide the problem. It's a stigma about being, living in poverty. So I'm just wondering what initiatives in Serbia you have for making sure children who are in your schools are not going hungry. You can't have studies on them to starve them to see the bad effects of it. We know what the effects are, but what are you doing on that issue?
I'll just reply on behalf of the 12 countries, and I'll leave Serbia replying on behalf of Serbia. It's a very good point, because in Africa, this is something which is always talked about. We need school gardens, we need school canteens, and there will be a lot of income-generating activities around planting cereals and so on, so that children can eat. But in this region, it's kind of thing that we don't really want to talk about. And for schools that often do not want to have that extra responsibility for having school gardens. But I have seen in a few countries school breakfasts type interventions whereby the poorest students were given breakfast upon arrival. And there are still school meals which are also organized and funded by WFP in a few countries. But that tends to be for primary school students. And actually, when you go to secondary school, then you don't have anything, because that support is for primary school children only. And this is definitely one of the reasons why they don't attend. So the answer is I don't have any good practice to share because I haven't seen any.
Kad smo već kod hrane i doručka, evo vreme i za ručak. Moram da glumim školskog policajca i da vas zamolim da budete ovde ponovo u 2 sata, jer imamo i nastavak konferencije. Prijatno na ručku.